everyone. Thank you for being here. This is Yisroel from Lakewood, and you reached out to me because you had seen the interview with Avi Kahan, and you thought that you could do a better job than him. So, sounds good. I'm down to see that. Ultimately, I think it is about having this conversation. I think the Torah makes it very clear that we need to have the conversation, speak of it all the time. And so that's what we're here to do. I'll just tell you my opening statement, which is the position that I hold, and that is that I imagine we agree on the foundation being the Torah, the Chumshei Torah, the five books of Moses. If you go into any synagogue, shul, you'll see the Torah scroll in the Ark. That's the Torah. That was written 3,500 years ago. I imagine we both believe this is the traditionally held Jewish belief, and it is what the Torah itself says, that this was written by Moshe, by Moses, communicated directly from God, and those are the commandments. Now, the history, the way it played out, is that 1,500 years after that time of Moses, there was the time of the rabbis, and that would be the time of the Mishnah and the Talmud. And during that time, the rabbis wrote down an extensive amount of literature, the Mishnah being the law, the Midrash being the narrative story, the Zohar being the mystical Kabbalah. And from there, we just see books exploding for the past 2,000 years. So it's been now 2,000 years of rabbinic literature just exploding, throughout Europe and the scholars in the Middle East, the rabbis just writing books after books, and many, many laws, many, many ideas, beliefs that have been derived from what is called the oral Torah. Now, my only contention with all this is that Torah was written 1,500 years after Moses. Now, I know that the claim is that it's traced back to Moses, except I don't believe that. I don't see the connection. In fact, when I look at the Torah, I see a complete work. I see laws that are given, that are clear, that are straightforward. Not that there are no questions. Obviously, there's always questions. But the point is that the laws are clear what they are. And we are told to follow those laws written in that Torah, as it says, this Torah, without adding or subtracting to those commandments. And so, as far as I understand, the law that applies to all the Jewish people that we all have to follow are the laws that God gave us. And God tells us not to add or subtract to those laws. And so when I see the rabbis' writings and their opinions spanning generations, where they're writing essentially their opinions, where they say, this rabbi says that and this rabbi says that, which is what it says in all of their books, then we're talking about a tradition that is rooted in the words of man. And I don't see that as an authority that I have to follow. I only have to follow the authority of God and those that speak in his name. But those who introduce entirely different trains of thought, then it's not in the Torah. And so I don't see it as binding law. So that's my argument, and I'm curious to hear your response. I know that you live in Lakewood. For anyone who doesn't know, Lakewood is in New Jersey. It's a very religious, ultra-Orthodox town where a lot of the men there spend their lives studying the Talmud and the Torah, so I'd be happy to hear your response.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to ask you a question. Basically, in the Torah, we know it says that if God speaks to the Jews and says, if you want any time to appoint a king, I allow you to, but I should choose the king. And we see also in history, you can see we had a lot of kings. Some were good, some were bad. And king, we both know that when God said in the Torah that you could have a king on top of you guys, we all know what a king is, right? A king can tell you what to do or not to do. He puts the laws in place. He enforces the law, just like a government even today, right? Government enforces laws. They have courts to enforce the law. So God knew when he said he could put a king, he knew a king can enforce laws. Now, the law, for example, if the king puts in a law, let's say you can't go over speed limit or whatever it would be, right? Everyone has to give a certain percentage of tax. That's not adding to the Torah, even though a king has the stamp authority from the Torah to rule over the people, right? So by him making a law, that's not adding. What would be adding, for example? The Torah is, for example, God says to take esrog, right? He's saying it's not an esrog, whatever, like a fruit, take a fruit in the sukkot, right? So if he would say, no, you should take two, you should take five, that's adding to the Torah, right? That's adding to the commandments or subtracting if he says less. But something that has nothing to do with the Torah, if he doesn't say, the Torah told me so and so, he's not adding. He makes his own rules. Now, the question is, should we be obligated to listen to his rules or no? The rules that he makes is not Torah rules unless he says it's from the Torah, right? Would you agree to that?
So a few things. So first of all, a king is not just given unlimited power. In fact, the Torah says a king needs to write a copy of the Torah and read it constantly so that he doesn't become arrogant over his subjects and doesn't enforce immoral and unjust laws. And that just means that a king of Israel needs to receive his judgment from the Torah, and he needs to follow the Torah. Now again, we have to just understand that the Jewish people right now do not have a king. They do not have a court. They do not even have a land. Even though that Israel exists and there's Jews in Israel, first of all, they don't really have the entire land in a secure manner, obviously. Plus, it's not a state that's governed by the Torah. It's a secular state that is governed by ethnic Jews. And so the Jewish people exist in a state without a king, without a court, without a land. So who exactly is going to come and take up that authority? So again, my argument is twofold. First of all, the authorities, the king, the priest, the judge, he's not just there to make up his own laws. He's there to enforce God's laws. Second of all, no one in the Jewish people today actually, or even 2,000 years ago for that matter, none of us qualify for that position. And for the final point that you made about if I admit that this law is not in the Torah, but I'm adding it for a different reason, right? That's not adding to the Torah. Well, that's a good point. And I wish there was more transparency on that, because when you learn Torah from, say, an Orthodox source, they don't always differentiate between what is a rabbinic commandment and what is a Torah commandment. But let's just say, like, according to the rabbis, if I didn't use a citron fruit as the fruit on Sukkot, I wouldn't fulfill the commandment, right? Is that true? Like if I didn't
Yeah.
use traditional citron etrog, but I used a different fruit that was beautiful and splendorous and fulfilled the obligation of the Torah, but it didn't fulfill the obligation of the rabbis, they would say that I didn't fulfill the commandment, which means they are adding to the commandment. They're adding a condition to the commandment that is not in the Torah. So I consider that adding.
Right. But what if God says that you should listen to them? You should listen to what they say
Where does he
to
say
the
that?
all the right. Let's get to this later. First of all, if you would you if I show you somewhere, right, that the God said you should listen to what they tell you,
That
then
God
you would
said you should
agree
listen
that if they say it
to.
should be a certain fruit, you should do that fruit.
So God said you should listen to the rabbis of the Talmud.
He
Because
didn't say Talmud.
he never says that, right? He never says that you should listen to these rabbis. He says, I mean, I assume what you're referencing is this source that's taken out of context. Um, it's Deuteronomy chapter 14. Let me find it right now, because this is like the classic example, and I've even seen it brought up in serious sources like the Rambam in his commentary on the Mishnah. He brings this up as a proof that you must listen to the rabbis. So this is, yes, it's Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 8, and it says, if you have a doubt in the law, then you should go up to the high court that exists in the temple, where the priests and the judges are there, and you should ask their advice, and you should act in accordance with what they tell you, right? And so the problem is, again, much like the king, the position of king doesn't exist. The position of high court judges and priests doesn't exist either. There's no temple, there's no high court. And so it would be disingenuous for, say, your local rabbi to give himself the title of a priest or judge in the high court in the temple when that's just not what he is. Not to mention, their job is not to make new laws. Their job is to clarify a doubt in the law, in the already existing law.
Right. What would you call like a Supreme Court, like Sanhedrin, right?
Well, I mean,
What
word
would
Sanhedrin.
qualify a court to be called like a judge that the Torah, what you just read,
Well,
says to go to?
let's just give the scenario, right? First of all, the word Sanhedrin is not in the Torah, but the Torah refers
Correct.
to this court of judges and priests that is in the temple, right? And so you would need a temple, and you would need a priesthood, and you would need a court system that actually has legal power. And presumably this is all in the land of Israel, because the place that God chooses is Israel. We already know that. We even have the Temple Mount in Jerusalem as the place where God chose originally for the first and second temple to be. So right now there's a mosque on the Temple Mount. There is no organized religious court. There is no active priesthood. So we would need all of those requirements in order for this to even be qualified as this court that has such supreme power. So that's just not what they are. So
Okay, so how would you explain Deuteronomy 16:18, where it says that you should put judges and people to enforce the law in all of your cities? They're not in the temple, but they still have authority to enforce the law in all cities.
yeah, of course. And again, there is no rabbinic court that has actual legal power. That's just kind of an important thing to point out, is that the rabbis for the past 2000 plus years have been existing under the rule of other governments, say whether it was the Romans or the Babylonians or the Europeans, right? So the rabbinic court has never actually had active power amongst the Jewish people unless they were in a shtetl or a ghetto where the people actively gave their power to these judges. But the point is, though, today, you live in America, you're not under the rule of a Jewish court. There is no Jewish court that's instituting Jewish law. But to your point, there should be. There should be. And again, obviously, ideally, this all is happening in Israel, in a Jewish country that's governed by Jewish law. But what are they supposed to do? They're supposed to judge the people with a righteous judgment. They're supposed to pursue righteousness. They're supposed to be truthful and implement God's law. So what is their role? What is the role of a judge? The role of a judge is to implement God's law. The role of a judge is to take the knowledge of the Torah, much like the king, to have his own copy of the Torah that he's written, to go over it and read it to understand what is the law of God, and that is my job, is to implement the law of God amongst God's people, not to create my own laws and my own ideas. That's not the priority for a judge. The priority for a judge is to implement God's law, not his own law.
Right, right. And it says if you have any doubt or you're not sure about a law, it's
Mhm.
also religious, not only like between your friends or money law, right? Also law like it says like if you have a let's say a mitzarat, right? I don't know how to say it in English, like all these stuff
Different
has to do
blood or
even with
different, yeah.
exactly, yeah. Then you should go to them and they shall clarify the
Mhm.
law to you, right?
Yeah.
So before we get to all what they say, like for example, you gave the example of citrus, right? Doesn't have to be exactly that. First of all, you would agree that if you have a doubt, you should go to the court. Now, my question is,
The court existed, right?
what?
If the court existed, like that's kind of
Right,
important.
but
It's a
so
theoretical
what would qualify
conversation.
what would qualify in your eyes a court to be official court that you would that you think the Torah spoke to?
Well, as we discussed, there's two courts. There are the local courts in each township, and then there is the Supreme Court, the High Court, and the Temple. So in order for a court to be valid within its township, it would need to have legal tender, legal power. It would need to be able to implement the laws over the people, and it needs to be a just court. In other words, we also have to discuss the fact that courts are subject to corruption. The Torah points that out, right? Judges can take bribes. Judges can you know, respect one person over another because of his social status and not actually enforce justice. So even courts need to be held accountable to a standard of justice that's above the court. But the role of a court in a city, in a town, is to implement the laws of the Torah. And if we lived in a proper Jewish state, then when there were doubts in those smaller courts, then we would bring it up to the Supreme Court, to the High Court. Again, the requirement being the temple, the place that God chooses, um, priests and judges who can actually give forth a conclusion on a doubtful law. And it's much like the system that Moses had, where he was the one who everyone went to on top, and then there was lesser judges to judge smaller groups of people. So that was just implemented, on a country basis. But again, you have to understand that the place we exist right now, we don't have prophets, right? Like prophecy is very important too in governing the people, because sometimes we just need God to tell us like who the king should be, or who is right, or what is the truth. So we don't have prophecy, we don't have kingship, we don't have judges, we don't have priests. So that's the state that the Jewish people find themselves in, just practically speaking. And so I agree with you that the ideal is that we had a comprehensive court system, but we just don't.
Okay, so I have a question. What did the Jews do before the temple was built, right? The temple was built in Solomon's time. It was a few hundred years from Moses till Solomon.
Yeah,
There
there
were
was
no high
the
court.
Mishkan.
So what did he do?
Well, there was there was still a temple. It was just the tabernacle. It was the Mishkan in Shiloh.
Right,
So
but
it
here God
wasn't in
said, go to the
Jerusalem.
temple which I will choose. Right? He says in that place, I don't see it as obligatory to that space specific. I just say, I see this verse as God saying, yes, I want it to be in that place when it exists. If it doesn't exist, it's not dependent on each other, just like
The
it wasn't
place,
dependent before or after, because God, yeah, I'll finish in a second, because God, he wants us to know the truth, right? So God knows the future. I believe he also believes so, right? God
Mhm.
knows the future.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah. So God knew that they wouldn't be in temple forever, right? He knew it's going to be destroyed. So he knew people after the destruction of the temple would have to still know what to do. And if they have any doubt, they should have someone to go to and ask. They should have a court. Now, why did God say, I'll go to the place which I choose and ask for your questions, right? Because yes, he wants it to be there as the main place where the priests used to worship and do all this stuff. He wants to be the Supreme Court to be in a specific place, but it's not dependent. I don't see anywhere in the verse that says if there's no if there's no how do you say, if whatever the temple gets destroyed, then you wouldn't have any court. The point of the court is to make everything clear. If there's any doubt, you go, they clarify the doubt. Now, people had doubt before the temple was built. They had doubt after. I'm sure God wouldn't let us live just. I know you agree that the Torah still is obligatory even today, so
Well,
you
no,
should have a court.
no.
Yeah,
Yeah, but I think if we had the ability to have courts, which we don't, because if we were to enforce the Torah's law, like, what is the Torah's law? Like, we know the Torah's law, right? If someone breaks Shabbat, you give them the death penalty. Like, let's say someone outright burnt a fire in the middle of the town on Shabbat, right? So if we put him to death, we'd all go to prison, right? So like, we don't even have the ability to implement God's law as Jewish people. But beyond that, I completely disagree with you. When it says go to this place that God chooses, that's imperative, because if we have God's presence among us, what is the place that God chooses? I mean, God chooses to rest his name there. He chooses to have his presence among us. If we don't have that place, that says a lot about the state of the Jewish people. It says that the Jewish people are not worthy of their land. They're not worthy of their God dwelling in their midst. That means that we have completely fallen, right? And so, so many of the laws in the Torah actually can't even be practiced when we're in exile and we're all over the world. So for a bunch of rabbis to go run in and claim to be, like, you understand, there's a power vacuum, right? There's a void. The void is, who is the Supreme Court for the Jewish people? And the answer is no one. Because if the answer was, oh, it could be me, it could be you, it could be him, like, anyone could go claim to be that. But if you understand that the it's based off of whether God's presence is among us. If God's presence is not among us, then we don't have anything. We don't have a Supreme Court. We don't have a supreme law. We don't have true leaders who actually have the authority that God has given them. So I actually think it's completely dependent on this entire scenario, that there is a high court that actually has this level of power. Remember, the level of power that this court has is so great that someone who willfully chooses with ill intention to not listen to this court is put to death, right? That's the conclusion of the law in verse 12. So let's just be clear. If I'm the one, if I say here in Los Angeles, oh, I'm that court, and you say in Lakewood, I'm the court, and then they say in Israel, I'm that court. What are we? People will be power drunk. which is what I think the rabbis did. And by the way, it says in Eruvin, the rabbis say, whoever does not listen, this is actually something the rabbi says, he says, be more careful with the words of the Sofrim, with the words of the rabbis, than with the words of the Torah. Because with the words of the Torah, there's different penalties. Maybe sometimes you get cut off, sometimes you get lashes, but if you don't listen to the rabbis, then you're deserving of death. And they take it from this verse because this verse says if you don't listen to the judge, the high court, you're deserving of death. The thing is that the rabbis of the Talmud are not the high court in the temple. And there's nothing inherent in what they are or what they said that makes them that, right? Like, what is the basis for them to claim that they have the authority of the high court that doesn't exist in the temple that doesn't exist? Right. So, and I can say that I'm that high court. I don't even claim that. I'm just claiming that their authority is no greater than mine just because they lived 2,000 years ago, and wrote a lot of books.
Okay, so yeah, you said a lot of things. It's hard to like remember exactly which to address, but basically, uh, God said to go to the judges, not to the prophets, right? He didn't say go to prophets, he said go to
Yeah.
judges. Judges have no communication with God. Yes, some of the judges in history, right, did have a prophecy or communication to God, but God did not say go to prophets, go to judges, and they'll give you the answer. Today, we could still have judges. Yes, we don't have prophets, we still have judges. And still, I don't see how you're going to deal with the verse that says you should have judges in each city, in each town, right? That's not in the temple, but God still says you should have a certain type of court also in each city. So today we should have a court, according to the gods from the Torah, in each city. Now, the way I understand it is that God, yes, wants to have a supreme court on top of them in the high temple, but I don't see anywhere in the verse where it says that if there's no temple, then you shouldn't have any court, right?
Oh, you're right. I mean, like,
Because the lot,
if
yeah.
we had the ability, we do not have the ability to have Torah courts anywhere in the world, maybe like in Saudi Arabia, but then we just, like we'd be killed for being Jews, right? So like only the Muslims really have law that is similar to the Torah, which is the Muslim law is immoral because, they'll like cut off a thief's hand, whereas in the Torah, a thief only pays double. But the point is the Muslims will actually like have the death penalty and do things like the Torah. If we were to practice the Torah law in Israel, in America, in Europe, we would go to prison the next day, right? So there is no active Jewish court that exists, period, because we're not allowed to exist. And again, I agree with you. Judges are not prophets, but the judges need to be accountable to the law. That's why the judges must be well versed in the law, and the law has already been given. The law is the Torah. So if I see a judge who gets up and says a ruling that's against the Torah, well, he's not a valid judge. Even if you wanted to say like maybe I'm not a judge with legal power, but I'm a judge as in like I'm a rabbi. Like I think rabbis are basically judges, right? Like they're judges of the Torah, and like people want to know like what should I do on Shabbat? What should I do for kosher? They come to a rabbi and the rabbi says, "Okay, this is my judgment." But then you have to judge the judgment of the judge, right? As in like what is the judge saying? Is the judge saying a truthful judgment or is he saying a faulty judgment? And my point is that when you look at the judgments of the rabbis, what they're saying is not derived from the Torah. It's derived from some secret oral Torah knowledge that is not rooted in the word of God itself. And so that's not ultimately going to be binding for the Jewish people. And I don't see that as truthful judgment.
Okay, so yeah, I would agree with you that yeah, today of course we don't have the power to execute people who don't keep Shabbat and all that. So I would agree that for that we can't have a court nowadays. But it's not like either all or nothing, right? If you can't do something, so I shouldn't do anything. So at least we should have courts that to deal with regular questions, right? Courts won't have the power to enforce it, but they would still have the power to let you know what to do and what not to do.
I don't have anything wrong with Jewish communities setting up bodies of courts and judges to at least teach Torah to people and try to mediate debates between different parties. I don't have anything wrong with that. The point is what are the judgments that the judges are making? What are their judges? Well, what are their judgments? What are they saying? What are they telling people? Is it truthful? Is it right? Is it in line with the Torah? So that's more my argument is like the judgments that I'm seeing coming from the judges of Judaism, whether it's in this modern day or the past 2,000 years, I'm not seeing it mirror the Torah correctly. I'm seeing it rooted in man-made laws that are nowhere to be found in the Torah.
Right, right. And the judges are men, right? Are people, human. It's not God, right? When God says go to judges,
But the
he refers
law,
to
the
humans.
judges are there to judge the law that God gave us. The Torah means law,
Right,
right? God has given us the law. This is the law of the Jewish people. Judges are people that are more well versed in the Torah than the average person and have
right,
the life experience and the wisdom and the social position, whether they've been elected or whether they've proven to be that person, that people come to them for advice, or come to them to mediate debates and disputes. But again, like I'm saying, it comes back to what is the judge saying? Because what I'm hearing from the judges is corrupted. What I'm hearing from the judges is not uh, Torah based. It's not based in the law of God. And so how could that be the correct judgment?
right. God said, right, that's when you have the ability to execute people. But God says, if someone would not listen to the judges, why would someone not listen to the judges, right? Because he thinks they're not correct. He thinks he knows better than the judges. God knew such a thing could happen. And he said, no, the judges, even though you think the judges are not correct, right, you should listen to them because I told you to listen to them. Even though they made a mistake, you should listen to them.
Well, not exactly. So two things. First of all, again, this statement, you must listen to the judges, you must listen to the judges, is said explicitly by the high court. So clearly their authority is more powerful than your local court. Not to say that you do need to listen to the local court if it's actually true, but this is the point, and this is a word that I want to point out, is it says in and this is again chapter 17, this is verse 12. It says, the man who shall act bizadon. The word bizadon is like bemazed, with like a willful intention to do the wrong thing. That's the person here that the Torah is calling out as being unjust, right? Like comes from the word bemazed, right? So I disagree with what you're saying, which is that, oh, even if the judges are clearly wrong, or even if the judges are clearly immoral, like let's say the judges tell you to worship other gods, should you listen to them? Like, do they have blanket power to tell you to do anything in the world, even if it goes directly against God? Now, I'm giving you an extreme example to prove the point that the judges they're not gods. You don't just listen to them blindly. That's why the only person who's punished is the person who goes against them willfully with a negative intention to do the wrong thing. Not just, but what if someone protests from a moral place of morality, says like, no, like this is wrong, what you're doing for this and this reason, because the Torah clearly doesn't say this, or because the Torah clearly says something else. That's not someone who's acting with ill intention to do the wrong thing. That's someone who's acting with righteousness to oppose a corrupt system, and that's a possibility as well. Like you can even find this in the book of Yirmiyahu. Jeremiah talks about the priests, the judges, the scribes. He says they're liars, they're unjust, they're corrupted. That was in the time of the first temple. So I'm sure during the first temple there was a high court, but the prophet was criticizing the system that had become corrupted, and so we live in a tight structure here where we do have we do have systems that are run by men, but the only way for them to stay moral is if they are accountable to God, and so that's really what I'm pushing for here, is that the system needs to be accountable to God. Otherwise, everyone's just going to go run away with their own power, which is definitely not the goal of the Torah here.
Right. So a few things. First of all, Jeremiah did not refer, to my knowledge, to the Supreme Court, to the judges, right? He was referring to scribes, to the priests. Another thing is the court has not one person, not two, right? What we claim is they had 71. The Supreme Court had
There's
71
no there's no
people in there.
biblical basis for that, of course.
Okay, but that's based on our tradition. Now, okay, even if it wasn't 70, you think it was one person? No, court
So
has few people.
yeah, it's plural,
So you always
priests,
go based,
judges. Yeah.
right? So you always go based on the majority. Even in the Torah, it says you should go
Well,
after the
it does not
majority.
say that actually. You know what's fascinating? I can't
Yeah,
believe this verse has been taken out of context. If you actually look at that verse, it says the opposite. Okay, so this is a famous, this is insane to me. You'll hear this in yeshiva as well when they talk about the rulings. They say, Acharei Rabbim Lahatos, right? You must turn after the majority, and the majority is what makes things right. Now, if you actually look at the verse is saying the opposite. It's saying that you should not follow the majority to do evil and to pervert the law. So it's explicitly telling you that the majority does not rule when they are wrong, when they're explicitly wrong. And so I'll just show you the source because it's
Yeah,
a very
yeah, I know that. Yeah.
it's a very important source. It's in Parshat Mishpatim. It's chapter 23, verse 2. You shall not be after the majority for evils, and you shall not respond over a dispute to turn after the majority to pervert, right? You should not turn after them. You should not. So if you take the words right before Acharei Rabim Lahatot, Lo ta'aneh al riv lintot acharei rabim lahatot. You should not respond over a dispute to turn after the majority to pervert. So, in fact, the Torah is telling you a very important thing about law is that we don't just go by the majority. We don't just be like, oh, this is what they say, this is what we got to do. In fact, it's about truth. It's about righteousness. It's about what actual justice is. And the majority does not determine what's right. God determines what's right. And his law that he's revealed to us is the primary reference point that we have for what's right and wrong. So again, even if the majority of judges said, yeah, we should start eating pork, we're not going to do that because the Torah explicitly says a pig is not a kosher animal.
Correct. But so basically the verse says you shouldn't go after the majority to do evil,
And to
which
pervert,
means why does the verse even have to say that? Right? That's obvious.
not obvious. What are you
If
talking
of
about?
course it's obvious.
Not obvious at
The
all.
Torah says do not go after, do not do evil, right? So why would the Torah have to come now and say, oh, don't go after majority to do evil? Because obviously the majority, you have to follow the majority. And now the Torah comes and says, no, but for evil, do not follow them. Because it's the opposite. For example, I'll give you an example. If someone now eats ice cream and I tell him, don't finish the ice cream, it's obvious that I allowed him to eat the ice cream. I just didn't allow him to finish it. But if I tell him don't finish the ice cream, doesn't mean I didn't allow him to eat it. I did. Over here, the God says, yes, don't follow a majority to do evil, but you should follow them. It's obvious you should follow them to do good.
Well, I mean, you're allowed
That's
to.
why the verse comes in.
What if the majority of people, wore white shirts and black pants? Am I not allowed to wear a blue shirt? Because the majority, like it's not a requirement. You must follow the majority. In fact, it's telling you specifically when the majority is wrong. And by the way, what you're saying is completely wrong. It does have to be said. I mean, even just take a concept like democracy. Democracy is a system that's built around the majority of votes. And now, if the majority of people voted that um, murder was right, then essentially murder would be legal, right? Because morality is determined by the number of people that agree on something. That is the modern understanding of morality, actually. If you ask say an atheist, where do you derive your morality from? Well, it's intuitive and also it's what society decides, right? So like there's a very classic example right now is society decided that homosexuality is fine, but incest is still wrong, right? Now, why? Like if incest is two consenting adults and homosexuality is two consenting adults, if consenting adult is what dictates morality, then what's the difference between incest and homosexuality? The answer is, well, it's societal norms, right? So people, the majority of people, what they feel about a matter determines what's true. That is the human tendency. So God actually has to tell us, no, you not follow the majority. If you see the majority of people going and doing the wrong thing and they want to say, oh, because we say it now it's true. No, you still have to follow God and you have to follow the truth. Not to mention, there's no explicit commandment, you must follow the majority. All that being said, I do agree with you that if we're having a conversation and we decide to cast a vote or something, we're allowed to follow the majority, but we're not obligated to, and definitely not when they're wrong. Because when they're wrong, you actually should not follow them.
Right. So basically the verse, why doesn't the verse say do not follow the majority? Why does it say do not follow them to do evil? Because of course God allows you to follow them and wants you to follow them to do good.
He allows you to, but again, I'm arguing that they're not doing good. So we'd actually have to bring up this verse to prove what I'm saying is that if the majority is not doing good, then you should not follow them just because the majority does not make them right.
Right, but within the court, majority should rule. For example, the court has three people, two say yes, one says no. Even without a Torah, logically you should follow the two because most likely they have the truth. Most likely.
Maybe. I mean, maybe. I'm not. I don't know if that's like a certainty. I think courts would somehow have to come to a consensus. I agree with you. I don't know if they do that through a vote or if they do that through extensive like debating and ultimately they just have to come to a consensus. But the point is that when you can demonstrate that the majority is wrong, then you actually bring up this law that tells you do not follow the majority when they're wrong. And so my argument here is not that that you shouldn't follow the majority ever. My argument is that you should not follow the majority when they're wrong.
All right, so you agree with me, you should follow the majority as long as they don't do evil like it says in the verse, right? They don't do wrong.
I mean, I think it's you following the majority for good usually works.
Right.
But I don't
But
think it's like a
also,
necessity necessarily. Like there are times where you just don't like if everyone's doing something, do you have to just go along and do that? Well, not if you're doing nothing wrong, you don't have to necessarily follow the majority. But I understand your point in the context of a court. How do they come up with a verdict? Is it do they just vote on it and see what the majority is, or do they actually have to come to an agreement? That's what I'm just questioning here, is that how do judges come to a conclusion? Is it just through a vote of majority, or is it through actually needing to come to a consensus? And what you're saying is that you must follow the majority, and that the Torah says that. The Torah never says that. The Torah doesn't say you must follow the majority. That's your interpretation. Well, because the Torah said do not follow the majority for evil, that means that you should follow the majority for good. But that's your the Torah never says you should follow the majority. That's not what the Torah says.
right. So premise one is that the way we see the Torah is it's not a human book. Human book, you read whatever it says, you listen. I mean, you read whatever it says, whatever it doesn't say. It doesn't say we believe that God's book has 100 dimensions. God is limitless. Now, when he writes one thing, you can learn from one sentence, you can learn multiple things. So, for example, God uses this
You
to tell you
decide
don't go after
decide
what?
what you decide what we should learn from it. How do you know that's what God's intention was? Saying
Exactly. That's why.
you're coming up with or not you or some rabbi that you're quoting, but ultimately you have no way to prove that that's what the Torah means when the Torah says it, right? The reality is we have to stick to the text because it's God's word, and we would be arrogant and going out on a limb to pretend like we know what God's secret intention is behind his words. If God's telling you, do not follow the majority for evil, that is the law. Doesn't mean that now you must follow the majority in other cases. But again, I don't even really want to debate that so much because I don't have a problem with voting per se, but I do have a problem with voting majority when the majority is clearly wrong. And that's what I want to talk about because even if you were to demonstrate to me, which by the way, the majority of Jews are not Orthodox, so actually the majority of Jews today are non-observant. But even if you want to argue with me that the majority of observant Jews have been Orthodox, have been following the rabbis, have been following the Gemara and the rulings of the Sanhedrin that they claim they have preserved, that is what I view as a false majority. That is what I view as a majority that is perverting the law. So it wouldn't be something to follow anyway, even
Right.
though
So now, yeah, we all know that there's Karaites, Samaritans, Orthodox Jews, people like you. I'm assuming you unaffiliated. Everyone thinks they
I'd
have the
say I'm
truth.
basically a Karaite, although I heard Karaites are like more into the whole Tanakh. I'd be more like a Torahite. I don't know if that's like a new word, but just Torah, Yeah.
I hear. Yeah, so everyone thinks, every group thinks they know the truth, the true explanation of the Torah, the true meaning of the Torah, and they all have differences. Now, God came to this earth, He gave us this Torah to this earth. He wanted us to follow it. God knew that people can interpret it in different ways, just like we see in the reality, people interpret in different ways. It has to be a the real explanation has to be come down with the book logically and passed down generation to generation. Now we claim we have that truth that goes generation to generation till Moses. Now, would you agree with me that there has to be one true explanation to the Torah?
Well, I mean, again, the burden of proof is on the person that is saying, I have a multitude of laws that are not in the Torah that I'm telling you are now you have to follow as if they're on the same level as the Torah. The burden of proof is on you. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying follow the Torah as it is written. That's all you have to do. If you follow the Torah as it is written, you would not break the commandments. Period. I'm not here to add commandments. I'm here to add interpretations. And by the way, within certain commandments, maybe you could have slight different interpretations. That would be fine as long as you do not break the commandment itself. And
Right,
ultimately,
but even
again, like I was telling you, the place that we find ourselves in now is a place where um, every Jew is almost like on an individual path with God because there's no one to enforce the law, there's no one to tell them what to do. You just have to be honest with God in your observance. Are you actually following the laws in the Torah, or are you being crafty? Are you being trying to get out of it? But my point is, just to sum it up, is that I do not add to the Torah. I do not change anything in the Torah. The person that comes along with 10,000 books claiming that they all somehow are related to the Torah, or even if you wanted to like, thin it down as much as possible, just to like the halacha l'Moshe Sinai, the commandments that Moses got, and the methods of interpretation that the rabbis received, or whatever you want to, however thin you want to make it. The point is, it is a body of work that's outside of the Torah that you're claiming is part of the Torah and is on the same level as the Torah. The burden of proof is on you. I'm not saying that. I'm saying just read the Torah as it is. Do not add or subtract to it. You don't even don't even interpret it. Just read it.
right. Do you put on tefillin?
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay, so according to Karaites, you're adding to the Torah because the Torah meant it metaphorically, not physically. So you put in with the tefillin, it's adding to the Torah. Now, who's right? Are they right? Are you right?
Well, that's the thing is like I do think here's the thing, right? Not everyone's opinion is equally valid, right? When the Torah says tie these words as a sign upon your hand, place them as an ornament between your eyes, and put them upon the doorpost of your house. That sounds like a very literal commandment. The same way it would be like saying, oh, when the Torah tells you to take a fruit and a palm branch, it means metaphorically, right? It's like, no, right? The Torah is a very literal book. I don't actually agree with the Karaites if they were to claim that um, tefillin is metaphorical. It seems very literal in the way that it's expressed. Now, again, when the Torah tells you to write it on your heart, well, obviously that's metaphorical because you're not going to cut your chest open and start writing on your heart. You'd probably be dead by the end of that, right? So there is a point where there is clear metaphor, but then there's a point where there's clear literalism. So I don't think every opinion is equally valid. And I think that when the Torah tells you to actually bind a sign and an ornament and put something on your doorpost, that seems extremely literal. I don't even know how you can interpret that as metaphorical. And I'm glad for the Jews for preserving that. Like, I think props to Orthodox Jews for actually putting up mezuzahs on their house and for actually wearing tefillin and for wearing tzitzit, although they don't wear tchelas for some reason. I mean, I know the reasons because they claim you need a special snail, even though the Torah doesn't talk about that. But not to get too sidetracked, the point is though, I think it's very clear these are literal commandments. So why would you make them metaphorical? Now, every literal thing has a metaphorical counterpart. So I do think that the tefillin are metaphorical too, but they're literal. Of course they're literal.
Yeah, so I would agree with you with the doorpost, to put on the doorpost. I would agree with you. That sounds more like something physical than metaphorical.
I mean, it's
But
written
to
in the same
me,
breath. It's written in the same breath. It says, "You shall put this as a sign upon your hand, as an ornament between your eyes, and then write it upon the doorpost of your house." So
right,
that's like a succession of commandments, of literal commandments. Same way tzitzit are obviously literal. Make tassels on your garment. Like that's a literal commandment. And that makes a lot of sense. It's very like the Torah literally tells you to slaughter a goat when you sin. Like the Torah is a very hands-on religion. Build a hut and dwell in it for 7 days. Like what is that metaphorical? That's clearly not the Torah. The Torah is a literal book.
right. Another thing is they could swear that it is metaphorical. For example, on the doorpost means it should be always in your house. You should always follow it in your house. You should always. Now they could swear that it's metaphorical. I would agree with you. It's not. But two people could swear that they have the truth, but one has to be one has to have the truth. They can't both have the truth. Now God knew, because God knows the future, that people will have differences. Then, in order for God to be just, because a lot of different commands in the Torah, commandments have like threats, right? I'll cut you off the tree, the karet, all these stuff. So God, to be so strict, has to give us down the correct interpretation. Now, I don't say yet, right, I didn't prove yet that we have it, but I'm just saying it has to be. Another thing that you mentioned about for example, Sukkot, right? Someone came over to me and told me, who said, why do you think that Sukkot means you need to sit in a hut? Where
Mhm.
did the Jews come out from Egypt? The first place where they settled was Sukkot. That's the name of the place. How do you know that God did not mean you go, the Jews, every year and sit in Sukkot because that's the place where you dwelled,
Yeah.
right? Sukkot, and the place we dwelled the first when you came out of Egypt. I look at it, really looks like it. How can I tell them it's not the truth, right? Unless we have a tradition that it's a hut.
Yeah, I
By
mean,
the way, I have an answer to that, but that's besides the
well,
point.
look, I mean, I would have to look at the source. I'm pretty sure it says like do this in all of your dwelling places. But besides for that, that's very dumb because the reason why Sukkot is called Sukkot is because they built Sukkot. The same way Yaakov, I think even Yaakov, it goes back to the time of Yaakov. He went there and built Sukkot like huts for his sheep and his cattle. So, I mean, it's like the reason why it's called Sukkot is because of the huts. So the word sukkah means hut. And so, by the way, not to mention, I have a better answer is that we're already commanded to go to the temple on Sukkot, so you can't go to the temple
Correct.
and do Sukkot at the same time.
Correct. That's what I told him. Right.
Right. So I'm saying like that's the point is like we could have answers to these questions. It's not an infinite spiral. And by the way, as far as the Karaites go, you're not cut off from the people if you don't wrap to fill in, right? So it's not like what they're doing is like the end of the world. I just think they're missing out on the literal nature of the commandment because they're insisting that it's metaphorical. By the way, it is metaphorical too. When you have the words of God literally on your doorpost and literally on your arm, and then that'll metaphorically also encourage you to remember. And so it goes hand in hand. So I think this inability to bridge the gap between the literal and the metaphorical is like a mental block. It's not actually evil, it's just stupid. Like what's stopping you from making an ornament, when that's literally the commandment, or making tassels, which is literally it's a literal commandment. So again, I don't think this is interesting. This is like a funny one. It says in the art scroll Tanakh about the Karaites, because it says in the Torah, do not burn a fire in your dwelling places on the Sabbath day, right? And so my understanding, and I agree with your understanding and the traditional Jewish understanding, is that when it says you shall not burn, it's saying like don't actively burn it, right? But if you have a fire burning from before Shabbat and it's just burning in your fireplace and keeping the house warm on Friday night, that's not you burning it, it's burning on its own. But if you were to like add logs to the fire or kindle it that's burning, right? But they say no, you cannot have it burning, period, in your house, right? And so, like, okay, so they sit in the dark, right? Fine, they sit in the cold. Okay, that's their choice, right? But what it says in the art scroll is that they sat in physical darkness just as they sat in spiritual darkness all of their lives, right? It's like, well, that's uncalled for, right? Like you don't have to have a fire burning, right? Like if you want to not burn a fire, you can do that. And there is somewhat of a basis in the law for that. And so again, I don't agree with everything the Karaites say. Um, but I don't think that they're openly breaking the Torah by doing these things, you know.
Right. But for example, so they would say that by you wearing filling, you're adding to the Torah, which is going against the Torah, right? So it is a bad thing
But again, that's an
by
absurd
their
argument.
understanding.
But I'm just saying it's an absurd argument because the Torah does say that you should do this. So for you to do it literally would not be adding to the Torah. It would just be fulfilling the commandment literally. That's not adding, that's just fulfilling something physically, which actually makes a lot of sense. So the same way I'm being forgiving to them and saying like, okay, if you want to just be metaphorical, I suppose God's not going to kill you for that, right? I think they're missing out on having actual religious articles of faith with the words of God upon them, but they're not evil for doing that. They would have to give the same uh, understanding to a Jew who actually has these. You're not breaking the Torah. The Torah definitely leaves the door open for creating literal ornaments and literal tassels on your garments. That's explicitly not breaking the Torah. So again, my point is like just because someone else has an opinion, it doesn't mean it's right. Like we have to actively have this conversation, and that's the purpose.
Right. So, for example, when it comes to Shabbat, that is a thing that if you violate, then you are getting cut off the tree, Shabbat, right?
Well,
And
Shabbat,
we still have
you'd be
disagreements
put
about
to death.
Shabbat.
Yeah, you'd be put to death, and I believe karet, cutting off
All right.
people. Well, yeah.
Yeah. So this is, and we still have disagreements about Shabbat that I have with you. We have with Karaites. Everyone thinks Shabbat. We all have differences about Shabbat. What's allowed, what's not allowed, right? But
I mean,
I believe that God would give us down the correct interpretation. Something so severe that God would put the death penalty on, we should have the correct interpretation. Someone should have.
yeah,
But whatever. Okay, we can move on from this point because it's really going for
I,
long.
I,
But just I just want to put.
again, we just have to clarify something for the audience. The implication that the Orthodox tradition has created pure clarity on the issue of Shabbat is incorrect. I mean, they've made the claim that carrying your key in your pocket from your front yard into the street is somehow punishable by death. Like, well, is that clarifying the law, or is that creating some dramatic extreme law that actually doesn't make any sense? Well, they have debates on whether you can rip toilet paper or open bottle caps. So let's just not pretend like the orthodoxy has come up with perfect parameters for Shabbat. Ultimately, there are some clear commandments in the Torah that Shabbat comes along with, and then there are gray area. And within that gray area, we have to give people the right to function, right? The Torah doesn't say playing the piano is work, or breaking Shabbat. The Torah doesn't say ripping your toilet paper is work. So I think, or same thing with electricity, right? Like Orthodoxy has just decided that electricity is fire, even though it's not. And like the Torah talks about fire. So um no, the answer is I don't think that the oral law or the orthodoxy has come to actually clarify this matter. I think they have created their own laws, they've made it more restrictive, and they ultimately haven't provided any more clarity than someone can get from just reading the Torah itself. And so just read the Torah itself. Where the Torah is explicit, you have to follow that. Torah says, cook your food on the sixth day. The Torah says, do not leave your place. The Torah says, do not burn a fire, do not do work. And like, what is work? Okay, like we know what work is, and then sometimes there's doubt, and like you have to be honest. And again, um, you know, we don't have anyone who can implement this stuff. So you just have to be honest. You have to be honest with God.
Right. So to me, it looks very explicitly clear that the Torah says you should not do any melacha, right? The word melacha.
Yeah, work.
And the same word, what?
Work.
Not
Yeah.
only melacha could be also creating, which is not always has to be physical, right? But
I mean,
this, yeah,
that's Bria, right? But you could do
right.
like you could do a work of art, right? Like if you were to, this is a conversation I actually just had with someone on Friday where he was like, I'm writing a script, right? And like I want to talk about the characters on Shabbat. I'm not gonna write the script. I'm not gonna like sit down and get to work and start writing the script. I want to talk about the script. I want to talk about like the characters and like run some ideas. And it's like, well, there's a clear distinction, right? Like, are you putting together a work, or are you just kind of freelancing, or talking, or like sketching, or writing, or are you writing a book, or are you writing a column for a newspaper, right? So I think like again, one of the things that orthodoxy thrives off of is it just says it's all, you can't do anything. You just can't do anything, right? And so they've eliminated the gray area, but that's not actually the truth. Like there's still gray area. There's still uh, points where you can't just say like, oh, writing is for sure wrong. Like, is all writing is it a creation? Is it a work? Is it's a work of like you're just scribbling down some thoughts on a paper? So I think that there's a lot more nuance that has to come into these conversations, and surely it's convenient to just say that it's all wrong and it all can't be done. But what is the basis in the Torah for that? There isn't a basis.
Right. So the Torah says you should not do any melacha on Shabbat. Plus, it says in Exodus chapter 36, when they were building the tabernacle, God calls it melacha, the
Sure.
creation, the building, the tabernacle melacha. So whatever was done in the tabernacle to create it was a melacha, right?
Sure.
Putting it together, carrying stuff, whatever they were doing there, cutting
Building,
stuff.
building, sewing.
Exactly, that's a melacha.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So that's why we say everything that was done in the Mishkan and the tabernacle is a melacha on Shabbat, which you're not allowed to do. Because the Torah called melacha for the stuff that was done in the Mishkan, plus it called melacha on Shabbat that you shouldn't do any melacha. Now we do
Mean
have
that,
derivatives.
sorry,
What?
but does that mean that only the things that were done in the Mishkan are melacha, or potentially there could be more things?
That's a good question. That we have in the Talmud, a tractate that goes over all the stuff. What's the uh, origin of it? Is it the Derabanan? Is it the Deraita? All the stuff what's allowed, not allowed, right? But
Because
to be concise,
The Torah never says that work is defined by the things that were done in the tabernacle, right? Like it is fair to point out that the things done in the tabernacle were work, obviously building, painting, carving, all these like creating this entire house of God. Like, yeah, surely that was work. And again, it's good to point that out as in like, that would imply that maybe doing those things in your own house would also be work, So I agree with you. Work is not only labor, it's not only right, that would be like avodah is more like labor, but melacha is more just like the act of doing things. And by the way, the less you do on Shabbat, the more you're resting. The more like lishbot, Shabbat means to stop and to cease as well as to rest, right? So like just stop and don't do things. For the most part, you'll be better off. But then again, are you going to be able to put someone to death for playing a guitar? No. And I don't even think the Orthodoxy would claim that, right? Can you put someone to death for opening a bottle cap? No. However, the Orthodoxy will say that you can put someone to death for carrying your handkerchief in your pocket. I think that's insane. I think that's literally insane.
for carrying, right? For example, first of all, in the Mishkan, they were carrying stuff let's say, for example, right, from the forest to the Mishkan, people were
They're
bringing stuff
also
to the Mishkan from
talking.
the
They were
house.
also talking. Is now talking
Correct,
is work?
correct. No, correct. I agree. But talking, of course, there's differences, right? I would agree with you. Talking is not an issue. That's why we need.
So carrying a not a heavy object. Obviously, if you were carrying a couch on your back, that's work. If you're just carrying your key in your pocket or pushing your baby in your stroller, that's work. By what definition?
It's not work, but we see also, for example, in Jeremiah, right? I'm not saying he's uh you're not taking him as like the Torah, right? But we see historically, we believe Jeremiah was a prophet, and he was telling the Jews in Jeremiah chapter 17, he was saying, don't
Did he
carry
say?
stuff outside.
No, he didn't say
What?
don't carry stuff. He said do not carry a burden. I can find it for you. What is it? 16?
17, chapter 17, verse 21.
Al tisu masa. Masa is a burden, right? So you do not carry a burden on the Sabbath day. Like, well, of course, a burden is work, right? If you shouldn't be carrying burdensome things in the gates of Jerusalem, that sounds like that you're working. What are you like carrying your wares into town and trying to sell it, or you're just carrying heavy things? That's work. That's why, by the way, I believe like lifting weights. If someone were to go like do a workout on Shabbat, like a heavy workout, I don't mean like stretching, but like someone who's doing like a heavy workout on Shabbat, that's work, like so Jeremiah is just describing carrying burdens in the gates of Jerusalem. That's obviously work. But
Right, but
carrying your baby or pushing a stroller or carrying your key in your pocket, that's not a burden. That's just
right,
normal.
okay. I'm sorry, continue. You done?
Mhm.
Oh, okay, yeah. So first of all, I don't see it as a burden. It says masa. Masa does not have to be a burden. Masa is something that you carry. But just I'll go with you. Let's say something heavy. If I now take something on my donkey, right? We're talking back then, they had donkeys. If I'm carrying something heavy on my donkey, am I working? It's nothing. The donkey does the job, yet they weren't allowed to do
Doesn't the
that
Torah
because
say
it's
your
carrying.
animal has to rest on Shabbat too?
Correct,
So that's why
correct.
you can't load
So
up
you're
your
saying
donkey.
that's considered part of the working the animal instead?
Course, of course. And by the way, if it's not a heavy thing, then that's fine. But if you're working your animal on Shabbat, then you're breaking Shabbat because Shabbat says you, your animal, your maidservant, everyone has to rest.
Right.
And
Also,
again,
Nehemiah, just in general.
but yeah, sorry.
What?
No, I
I'm saying
do
also
think
in the Shema,
that is explicitly a burden. The way that like the word masa means burden, as opposed, it doesn't say like do not carry, right? It says like masa is like a burden, as far as my Hebrew.
so right, but it says, for example, in verse 22, right, it says, "Do not take out of your house a masa," right? Don't take out of your house a masa. So what would you have? What would you write if it's something else? It says, "Do not take out." What you should not take out? Masa, something that you
I
feel
think he's
hold.
emphasizing the burdensome nature of the thing that you're carrying, not just carrying itself, not just carrying a handkerchief. He's saying carrying a masa, carrying a burden. I mean, even Art Scroll translated as burden. That's pretty clear that that's what's being said, and that's what makes it work. What makes it work is that it's heavy, right? And so, saying do not carry heavy burdens and do not do any work. Um, so that would be to me what he's saying here. Again, not to mention by the end of the conversation, it's just not the Torah anyway.
Right, but a prophet follows the Torah.
I mean, yes and no, because like, even prophets don't have the ability to add commandments to the Torah. Like prophets, what makes a prophet a true prophet is that they're in line with the Torah. But if they're just making things up and saying like one of the things says like go worship other gods, if that's what a prophet says, then he's not a real prophet. Or like if he's saying things that in the name of God that contradict what we already know from God, where God never says something like that. But again, I really don't even think there's a contradiction here. I think Jeremiah is explicitly referring to a burden, which makes it work.
I hear. Yeah, I would agree with you that some prophets did some bad things and they were criticized for these bad things in the Tanakh, right? They were criticized for these things. Stuff they were not criticized for means it was not something bad, right? Another thing, yeah, so basically you would agree with me that you need to have a certain tradition that comes down that has to be the true tradition, would you? Because like what we saw, that some people can come up with different interpretations. They both think they're right. And I wouldn't believe that God will give us a Torah they can come up with different interpretation without having the correct interpretation down for the people.
No, so I don't think the interpretation's necessary. I think the tradition. I don't think the tradition is necessary. I think the tradition could be helpful, but the tradition is not binding, right? So just because we have this tradition doesn't mean it's necessarily the truth. Like, yeah, it could be helpful to have certain traditions. Like this is how Jews have uh, implemented the laws. But when the tradition starts to become followed as if it's the Torah itself, that's where the problem arises because that's not actually the case. The tradition is not binding law. And even if we did not have a shred of tradition, we would still be able to follow the Torah and fulfill the commandments.
So how do you have different groups of people that have different understandings?
Because the understandings are slight. The difference in an opinion are slight. They don't actually come into to breaking the law. Only if someone's understanding was like, I don't believe in the law, right? Which is like something that exists in Reform Judaism, for example, right? Like Reform Judaism says the Torah was written by men in an ancient patriarchal society, and we don't believe in the Torah, right? So they're like, we'll incorporate Jewish culture because it makes us feel good, but also we're just liberal leftists from the 21st century, and we don't care about God, right? And essentially they just do whatever they want. They don't keep kosher, they don't keep Shabbat, they don't keep the laws of purity, of sexuality, of anything. They just do whatever they want. So that would be an example of someone that's not a valid group of Jews because they're explicitly deviating from the Torah and just denying the law altogether. But if people were taking the law seriously and following it by the letter of the law, even if the interpretations were slightly different and the actions looked a little different, if your tefillin were round and mine were square, or even if someone said it's metaphorical, which I don't agree with, but I think it's still not to the point of like just the Torah is now gone. Like the Torah is still here. These commandments are still relevant and they're still being followed um, to the best of our ability.
Right, but they are huge significance. For example, I don't know what your opinion is on when it says you should not leave your makom, right? I don't know how you would interpret it on Shabbat. How do you interpret that?
Well, your place is not your house. It doesn't say don't leave your house or your tent. It says don't leave your place. So your place would have to mean your surrounding area. Now, again, is it a specific number of cubits or feet or kilometers? No, that's not provided. So you would have to, again, use your better judgment.
Right, but that's something very severe. If you don't listen to that commandment, it is karet. You can if there's a high court, you can get go to death. Right, they could kill you for that. It has to be something specific. What it means. Right, one could say, "Oh, for me, it's still considered my place, so you can't kill me for that." So how can you put someone to death if everyone's going to claim, "No, that's considered my still my." I consider the city my space. I consider the state my space. Everyone can consider differently. There has to be a either it's a house, either it's a city, either it's a state.
I mean, yes and no. Like there are city limits. It's interesting. I did see a source because the rabbis claim it's 2,000 amot, right? 2,000 cubits. And there's somewhat of a source for that with the city limits of the Levites. So the Leviim, they have their own cities. But it wasn't exactly 2,000, but the 2,000 cubits was mentioned. Um, I'd have to find it exactly. But maybe we can use that as a source. But I don't, again, the fact that I don't have a clear-cut answer does not now mean that I can go and make something up, right? And so like ultimately I do think that you have to use your better judgment. And look, there are some things it's not fully not understandable. Like if someone hops in their car and goes on a road trip on Shabbat, they left their place, right? If someone gets on a plane and flies to another country, they've left their place. So, we're really just questioning like, is it your block or is it your neighborhood? Like something to that degree. And again, I don't think that like unless someone explicitly broke that commandment, and yeah, that you do need judges to determine these things, right? Like this guy got in his car and went on a road trip. Okay, like he broke the commandment, right? And so like that's when you would implement it. But if you walk down the block or you walked a couple blocks, I don't think you'd be put to death. You wouldn't be put to death in a just court system, you know? And so I don't think it's that I don't think it's like, oh, could be all of planet Earth or just your living room. Like I think that there is an obvious distance where someone has left their place. And but you're right, it's not, I cannot provide you with a clear-cut number. But then again, you have to understand how that just because someone comes and says, "Oh, well, I have the answer," it doesn't mean that they actually have the answer. It doesn't mean that what they're saying is actually true. Oh, it's 2,000 cubits, exactly 2,000 cubits, right? But of course, if you put a piece of bread on a rock 2,000 cubits, then you can go another 2,000 cubits, right? Like that's also something the rabbis say, which is completely non like because you put a piece of bread on a rock, so now everything's your place, right? Or if you put a string around your neighborhood, now it's all one neighborhood, right? Like those are not sensible things to say either. So at the end of the day, like you can't just create a feeling of certainty when the things that are being said are absurd, and so I don't agree with the interpretations or the laws that the rabbis have created in order to pretend like they have certainty around this issue when they really don't.
Right. So Mekomo is not a place you own, it's a place you stay. So if I put a bread 2,000 miles from here, right, and I decide to stay there, I cannot leave that place for another, right? Would still debatable. You saying, yeah, there's no proof that's 2,000 miles, but still, there's certain limit that you can go out of. So if I put a bread, that's I consider my space. It's my space. It doesn't have to be
Oh,
something you
it's your
own.
place because you put a loaf of bread there?
No, it's not your place. It's a place where you stay. It doesn't say you need to. The place has to be yours.
Well, I know. I'm
Makom,
saying,
it's
but now that is like that's a place that you stay because you have a piece of bread there. Is that true?
if you consider it that way. So yes, why not? How could you say not?
I mean, also you've already left one place to go to another place, right? Like if I have a house, if I have houses, let's just say it wasn't bread. If I had a house, in another place, I would still have to leave this place to go to that place. So it doesn't actually change anything. And again,
Right,
not to,
but if
not to mention a string around your neighborhood, like a string is going to create a singular domain because you have a string. I mean, in what world is that true?
right, so if if for example, like you gave this example, if I have a house 2,000 miles from where I'm at, and the limit is 2,000 miles, right? We could argue if that's the limit, but let's say the limit is 2,000 miles. If I have a house there, right? So I go up to there, it's still my makom, right? Because it's 2,000 miles. Then I'm again in my house. I can go 2,000 miles more because it's still my makom.
It's
That's the
not
only
2,000
question.
miles. That would be really far. 2,000 cubits, right? I'm,
Right, for example, yeah.
but I mean, the problem is at that point you're definitely not resting because you're just going from one piece of bread to the next, and you're just like you're on a like you're backpacking across the mountain range at that point. So I don't really see the relevancy of this again, and it comes down to these conversations like we're looking for loopholes. Like you shouldn't be looking for loopholes. That's not actually correct. It's very clear that you need to be extremely restful on Shabbat, more so than the holidays, by the way, because like it doesn't say all of these things by the holiday. It says it by the Shabbat of the seventh day specifically. So, let's keep that serious, and again, is 2,000 cubits the marker? I still think there's no evidence from the Torah that you can say that that's for sure what it means to be your place. But point is, use your better judgment. And again, I pray that there'd be a situation where maybe we could ask God these questions and we could get the answers. But that's just not the case right now. So we have to work with what we have, not just pretend like we have a certainty because a rabbi wrote something in a book.
Right. And God knew that we wouldn't have prophets forever. That's why he said you should go to the judges, which are humans and not prophets, to ask God, right? You should decide down here. You have the book, you decide from the book, right? Or from the tradition that got the explanation of the book. That's why God said you go to judges and not to prophets.
Mm.
And by Eruv, that you say the strings, I don't get why you see an issue here because we believe we can't carry. Yeah, you think we could carry outside. We believe we are allowed to go out of the house, just like some carriers say you can't leave at all your house, right? But we believe you
And
could,
they
but you
wouldn't
can't
have a
carry
basis.
stuff outside.
They wouldn't have a basis for
Right?
saying that because it doesn't say house, it says place.
Right. And they would say a house that's your place, out of your house, it's not your place. How could you say they're wrong? I can't prove they're wrong, right? They could, it is logical to say so.
I mean, does your place mean the place that you own? Like, I don't, that's not it doesn't say your property. It doesn't say your neighborhood. It's place is a very specific word. Like place describes the place that you're in. And again, like, does that mean you have to sit like this, right? Like not move? Well, again, by the way, just to be clear, the Torah literally says each man should sit on his rear and not leave his place. So the Torah is almost telling you to like really stay put, in like an extreme sense. So uh, it would be fair to say that like you actually cannot really go anywhere. That would be a pretty significant statement. And again, I think a couple blocks is still fine, but once you're like going on a walk, there's like people who walk like 10 miles to go to shul on Shabbat. Like I always laugh because that just seems crazy. Like they're literally breaking a sweat. It's like basically work and definitely leaving your place, just so you can go, to shul. So there's clearly some holes in this. But again, we live in a time where we can cover ground a lot quicker with vehicles, say if you had a bicycle or an electric car. So it's weird. We live in a weird time. Again, we don't have full clarity. And I think it's worth admitting that sometimes.
Yeah. So yeah, so basically about the air roof, so we believe that's like a fence. If you turn it, you put air roof, it's like a fence, you turn it into your space, which you're allowed to walk in. That's what the air roof basically is.
But again, I just want to know, how does a string make that your space? Like that's not real. A string is like a minuscule. It's not like you built a wall around this place. Like you put a string, right? It's a string. So like you can see how the rabbis, they create a law that you're not allowed to carry, and then they create a loophole for their law that they made up. That's just almost more ridiculous than the law itself, which is, oh, put up a fishing line around your neighborhood, and now you can push your baby in your stroller. When the whole conversation should have never happened. You're allowed to push your baby in the stroller. Of course, that's not work, and you don't have to invest $100,000 in the construction operation to put a fishing line around your neighborhood.
Right. So, for example, police, when there's when there's a crime scene, right? They put like a yellow the string around. It's not like a real fence, but it still segregates the area. It doesn't have to be a physical fence that no one can pass through. The way we see it is a string is something that categorizes this whole area as one area. But
Well,
whatever,
it's a
we can pass
problem
by.
of your own making. So I have very little need to debate that. But again, I don't believe that. I just think that logically, putting a tiny string around a neighborhood. I mean, yes, you're right. It encloses it with a string, but that doesn't actually make it a single domain. It's kind of like I've seen many arrows. Like you look at it, you're just like, what is that even doing there? It doesn't actually create a real boundary and a real enclosure of a city. That's not what's really going on. It's really just a tiny line that you're putting around there. But again, it doesn't even need to be done because that's not the law. The law is nowhere in the Torah does it say that you're not allowed to carry your key in your pocket. It doesn't say that.
Just like it also doesn't say a lot of things, you know. For example, cutting your tissue, right? Like you were making fun of.
Mhm.
In the tabernacle, they were cutting stuff. They were cutting fabrics. They were cutting stuff. How can you say you're not allowed to cut
They're also
fabric, but
wearing
you're allowed to cut
shoes.
tissue?
They're also wearing
What?
clothes. You're not allowed to wear clothes on Shabbat.
No, no, no. But I'm talking about work. Cutting is work.
No, yeah, cutting entire fabrics and making uh canopies for a tabernacle. Yeah, that's work. Ripping toilet paper in your bathroom is not work. I mean,
Yeah,
that's just
but
obvious.
in the tabernacle, how could you say it was only big things? There's a lot of small detailed things that were put and made in
So the
the
contract,
tabernacle.
you're going to work. The people that were building the tabernacle, that was their work. That's what they were doing every day, all day, every day. When you go to work, you got to do work. Like that the whole point is what building the tabernacle was work. Sitting in your toilet, ripping toilet paper is not work. It's just not the definition of work.
Right, but again, melacha does not have to mean work. Melacha is something you create, something you do. Yeah, right? We could
Not
discuss
anything,
what's melacha exactly.
anything you do, not everything you do is melacha. It has to be work. The word melacha means work. It's you are actually doing some work. This is not work. And again, according to your definition of work, you would literally not be able to do anything. You wouldn't be able to cut vegetables for your salad. You wouldn't be able to, again, open a bottle cap. You wouldn't be able to open a door, probably. You wouldn't be able to get dressed. Like, again, that is a very extreme take. And again, by the way, if you want to sit in your chair like a statue and not move the whole Shabbat, you haven't done anything wrong. You're allowed to do that. You would have rested on your Shabbat. Like if you just wanted to do that. If you stayed in bed, I mean, again, the Shabbat you should make it holy, and you probably shouldn't torture yourself. That's not super restful. But the point is that I'm making is that ultimately, if you chose to take these understandings, it wouldn't be terrible. I just don't think it's very reasonable. And I think God allows us to be reasonable, and he wants the Torah to be livable, right? He says you should live with this Torah and let it enrich your life and make your life good. It's not here to turn you into some uh, you know, crazy person who's like doubting whether you can tie your shoes, like it's not helpful. It's not a helpful discussion.
Yeah, that's why I say we need a tradition to explain exactly what's allowed, what's not, because a melacha is very ambiguous. You see, in the Mishkan, they did a lot of things. Like you said, is to speak in melacha. They spoke in the Mishkan. That's why you need to have a tradition that explains to you what's considered melacha, what's not in the Mishkan, what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do. For example, a fisherman, right? For him, it's work, but you can have the same person just for his fun fishing on Sundays. That's not work. Is it allowed to fish? Is it not allowed to fish? Like you have a lot of stuff that are ambiguous that you need clear understanding because violating Shabbat is something serious. Also, I just have a question about, I want you to explain to me how you read this verse. I'll tell you one second which one it is. Hmm. Okay, Deuteronomy 23:25.
23, 25.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can eat, if you come into the vineyard of your fellow, you can eat grapes to your own satisfaction, but you cannot put anything into your vessel. So like if you had a basket or something, you can't take grapes off your fellow's vine, put it in your basket, but if you're walking in his field, you're allowed to just eat it and enjoy.
Right. So now if I own a field with grapes, why would I allow anyone to eat from my grapes? The Torah here clearly gives authority to anyone that passes by, just eat from his grapes as long as they don't put it like in a basket or whatever.
I
That's
mean, if you
stealing.
allow if you allowed someone into your field, right? Like I don't know if people are allowed to just trespass on your property. Most probably, if you had property, you'd guard it. But if you invited someone into your property, this is just encouraging brotherhood amongst the people. That like if someone's in your house, let's like, give you an example. I invite you into my house, and there's a bowl of chocolates on the counter, and using the bathroom, right? Do you have to wait for me to come back to ask if you can have a chocolate? No, you could just take one because you're in my house, right? And so I think it's a very nice commandment to encourage brotherhood amongst men. And like,
Right, but it's not referring to the guy that owns the field. It's referring to the guy that comes in,
yeah, I'm saying the guy
right?
who comes into someone else's field is allowed to just take off of the vine and eat, and he doesn't have to be worried that he's stealing. But if he were
Yeah,
like,
but
you started like taking my chocolates and putting them in your pocket, it's like, oh, well, now that's a problem.
right, but what if I don't let? Not everyone is so generous, right? Especially fields, right? I have filled with
God,
stuff.
that's the whole point. God
Who's
is interfering. He's saying you must let. You must let. You must let people who are allowed. I don't think it's saying like you should just allow people to trespass into your property. But if there's someone in your property, you yourself cannot be like, oh, I don't let you eat, right? Like, no, God is actually who God owns everything. He's allowing someone who's in your house, who's in your property to eat. You know, and that would probably apply to workers as well. Like if you hire someone to work in the field, it's not stealing to just take and take off the vine and eat. I think it's just a beautiful commandment.
Yeah, so to me, I see this verse very ambiguous. It doesn't say he was allowed, he wasn't allowed to enter. It just says random. It talks to a person that enters a field. You are allowed to eat as long as you don't take home, as long as you don't put it in your basket. You're allowed to eat from it. It doesn't say anything if he allows, if the owner allows or not allowed. To me, it
True.
seems very weird.
That's true. It's not about the owner allowing, it's about the owner of heaven and earth, God, who's allowing you to do that. Now, again, if you, God is not telling you, Yisroel, you're not allowed to fortify your field, put a gate around it. Of course, you're allowed to. You're allowed to, by the way, maybe not on Shemitah, though, right? On the Sabbath of the land, you actually need to let people take your crops. But on a regular year, you're not obligated to just let people come into your field. The point is, though, that if someone did come into your field, they're allowed to eat. That's the law.
Right here. Okay, so now I wanted to go back a little to the fact of
Sorry,
like,
can I just tell you one
yeah,
thing? This is
sure.
in Bamidbar in Numbers 35, and it's talking about the city limits for the Levites for their cities, and it says, so you should give them 1,000 cubits around the city, um, for like open spaces, and then you should give them an additional 2,000 cubits around the city, kind of just as like city limits. So I saw that I thought this was interesting. This actually would amount to 3,000 cubits altogether. And a cubit is like, again, considered to be like a foot and a half, um, officially. So the point is, this would be a good source to kind of say, like, this is considered city limits. But then again, you can argue that your place is not specifically your town, right? It's your place. So look, when the Torah says, do not get up off of your rear, I think we should take that very seriously.
Oh, you mean on Shabbat?
Yeah, on Shabbat. And again, I'm just pointing out there is a source because I always thought there was no source for 2,000 cubits as being a city limits. But I see here that God is saying for the Levites, you give them 1,000 cubits around the city for like just their open space, and then an additional 2,000 cubits for like city limits and stuff. Um, so that would be 3,000 cubits total. So that's still not a perfect proof for 2,000 cubits, but at least we see some source for 1,000 cubits plus 2,000 cubits being a considered a city limits. So just a kind of an olive branch to the 2,000 cubits thing.
Yeah. So you were saying that on Shabbat you need to sit on your chair and not
Well,
move?
you know, it, that's kind of one of the things where it's like if you take it literally, then you cannot get up off your chair, right? But I think that you could understand that as being slightly metaphorical, as in like do not get up off your rear and do not leave your place is telling you like don't go very far, right? Like if I tell you, don't get up off that chair, right? Like it could mean like literally don't move, or it just means like stay right here, like don't leave. That's kind of how I think like we're being told like don't leave, like you got to stay right here, and I don't think it means like you can't move a muscle, you can't get up off your chair. I think even it says the same language by the Egyptians in the plague of darkness, right? It says no man was able to get up off his rear. The rabbis interpret that to mean literally they were literally frozen in darkness. But if we just take a simple understanding of darkness, darkness doesn't make you not able to move. Yet it would if it's so dark, you wouldn't be able to get up off your chair because there's nowhere to go, right? So like it doesn't mean like you're physically not able to move. It just means like if you get up off your chair, you'll walk into the wall, So like there's nowhere really to go. I think that's the implication here is that do not get up off your ass means like just stay put. So that would be
Right.
that would be the understanding. I think that that's again the reasonable understanding. But if someone wanted to sit on their rear the whole Shabbat and not move, I wouldn't say, oh, you're breaking Shabbat.
Right. But would you consider it as adding to the Torah? Because if that's not the understanding of the Torah, is that adding
Is what adding?
by just sitting? If this is only metaphorical to sit, right? So Torah really means don't leave your place, whatever that means, your city or whatever it means, and you decide, no, I'm sitting down because it says sit. Is that not adding to the Torah? It says
It's not
lo
adding.
tosifo,
No, because you're just saying I'm choosing to carry it out literally. You're not adding. But if you were to say like you must do this, I think maybe that's adding, right? Because like if someone let's if someone who was a I'm sitting on my rear the entire Shabbat says, you who get up and go to the kitchen and go to your bedroom, you're breaking Shabbat. Like that seems to me as someone who's moralizing, too much. I think he's even doing too much in his own right, but like that's his choice. But if he's going to try to say that everyone has to do what I'm doing, that's a problem. And by the way, I think that that's the main problem here is that there is a degree of personal choice that you're allowed to interact with that a just court would not kill someone for, going in to sit in their front yard. But they also wouldn't kill someone for sitting on his rear and not getting up. So the point is there is an allowance of behavior that will differ one person from the other. And, we have to be kind of tolerant of that in the sense that we can debate as to what we think is more right, but not everyone's observance is going to look identical. And I don't think that that's a problem as long as we're not deviating from the commandments itself.
Right, but there's a thing here that if really it is metaphorical and the guy just decides to sit, if he just decides to sit because he wants to chill the whole Shabbat, no issue. But if he sits because he believes the Torah says to sit, that's the meaning, that's adding the Torah, according to my understanding, or the opposite. If the meaning is really yes to sit and not to move in, we are going out of our house, right? Then it is violating the Shabbat. So this is very like, you can get both understanding.
Yeah, again, that's why I say no one should claim that you have to do what they're doing. Like if you say you must do exactly what I'm doing, then you're adding, right? But if you're saying this is how I'm choosing to carry out the commandment, then you're allowed to do that, right? So it's like the same problem with, let's say, praying 3 times a day, right? Let's say you say I just love that practice. In the morning I wake up, I pray. In the afternoon I pray. In the evening I pray. It's great practice. That's what I do. But if you say now everyone is obligated to do this, and every single Jewish man from the age of 13 must go and pray with a minyan with 10 men every single day. 3 times a day. Well, now you've added because now you've created a commandment, you've created an obligation where you're telling people you must do this, right? And so that's what I'm saying. I don't think this is a problem so long as you're not trying to enforce your personal choice onto everyone as if it's law, right? Your personal choice of how to carry out these laws is not law. The law itself is the law. And there's a level of valid interpretations, and then there's a point where it's invalid, right? And so we have to be able to judge that where the invalid, at what point have you just crossed the line, right? And I think one of the examples of that is driving cars. This is something I looked into, is that the engine of a car literally operates with fire, and every second the engine is shooting forth like 2,000 flames of like fire in the engine, right? And so like most Reform Jews and like even conservative Jews will drive on Shabbat because they're like, whatever, man, like it's not work. Fair enough, it's not work, but it's burning a fire, right? And very often they'll be leaving their place if they get in the car and drive like 30 minutes or something. So uh, that's the point, is like there is a point where it's inadmissible. And then there's a point where we're still within the sphere of what's allowed and what's good. And so again, it requires honesty, it requires discussion. So like this discussion is necessary, and the Torah tells us to have these discussions. But for me to say
Right.
that my conclusion, my subjective conclusion, is something that you must do, that I think is where you're adding.
Right. So two things about the car. So this is an example of not doing work but still violating the Shabbat. So violating Shabbat doesn't have to be work. Could be
Because
other stuff that are not work, still violating Shabbat.
that commandment is
And
implicit. The
right,
Torah
I know. I mean,
explicitly says, do not burn a fire.
right, and I could say it's explicit also in the melacha that whatever is melacha in the Mishkan is, even though it's not physical or not like hard work, could be right. I
It's
could
not
also say that
explicit. It's not, the Torah never says the definition of work is that which was done in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle. That's completely interpretive. The Torah never
it calls it melacha,
yeah, it calls a lot of things melacha, right?
and it
But
says do not do melacha.
yes, but it
It's
doesn't.
simple.
The Torah never says that the definition of melacha is dependent on the tabernacle. That's a purely rabbinic connection. That the rabbi said, "Oh, therefore, the definition of melacha of work is that which was done in the tabernacle, nothing more, nothing less." That is not in the Torah. The Torah never says that the definition of melacha is what was done in the tabernacle. That's not explicit in the Torah.
Right. So the rabbis say that it's not less, but they do say there's more to that, like toladot and like stuff that derive from that. But to your point, it seemed to me like what you were saying is that when it says do not add or subtract or take off, like subtract, right? Yeah, from the Torah is only if you're telling it to other people to do. Like you gave the example of, let's say, davening, praying 3 times a day. You were saying that it's if you do it, no problem. If you tell others to do it, then it's adding to the Torah.
Even
But
with
to me, it
yourself,
seemed
you
like
shouldn't believe that you're obligated. You have to understand that what's motivating you is a personal decision, is a personal preference, or a personal understanding. So it's not just enforcing it on other people, even on yourself. If you say, "I believe I'm obligated to do this," and because this is what the Torah says, you're adding, right? But if it's a practice that you just choose to implement, like you're allowed to go to the gym, like that's probably a good thing. Are you obligated to go to the gym every single day at this time? No. But the point is, God gives us freedom in our lives to implement different practices and to do different things. But we have to understand where that's coming from. Is that coming from an obligation from God directly to do it this way, or is it coming from our own understanding?
right. So did you know the story with Joshua and the Gibeonites?
They claimed that they lived close by and they really lived far away.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So basically, I'll say to whoever's listening. So basically, Joshua was commanded with the Jews to conquer the land of Israel and to kill the people, the inhabitants, or kick them away. I forgot if that's also was the option. So they did not want to get killed or kicked away. So they lied. They say we are foreigners. And because of that, Joshua said, okay, we won't kill you guys. And then after he said that, he realized they lied and they were really not foreigners. So even though they lied, he still didn't break his promise. And he still said, okay, you will work for us, but we will not kill you, we'll not expel you. And we see, like a few hundred years after the time of King David, that God ordered King David to kill people that caused Gibeonites to die. He ordered King David to kill them. why would he kill them? First of all, there's two issues here. First of all, they lied. The whole promise was on a lie. Second of all, okay, if Joshua made a agreement with them, it's on Joshua. Why do 300 years, or I don't exact demand, well, a few hundred years after, why do people on that time have to be obligated to Joshua as a promise to them? You see here that God allowed and enforced a law that Joshua put in place. Even though he's a human, it doesn't say in the Torah,
It
and
actually
he
says
still
in the book of Joshua that he was wrong for doing that, right? Like I'm pretty sure God told
correct.
him, you were wrong, you shouldn't have done this. But again, assuming that you fully acknowledge the tradition of the Tanakh as being true and that, King David was actually talking to God and this was actually God's will, apparently you're correctly pointing out that God adopted Joshua's decision, even though Joshua's decision was a mistake. God basically was like, you must value your word, and what you said stands, and it just stands, and that was it.
Right.
So,
Not only your word, people 100 years after still have to uh, abide by that word
well, I
because
mean,
they
if
got punished for it.
Because God acknowledged it as being the right thing to do, right? So once God
Correct.
acknowledged that, it wasn't because of Joshua, it was because of God. It was because God actually told Joshua, you did the wrong thing, but you're still going to have to follow through with this, you know? Um, so yeah, I mean, it
Correct. So
comes
the same
down to
thing we say, so in the same way, we say that when God said, go to the judges and you listen to whatever they tell you to do, right? You should listen to them even 1,000 years after, even 2,000 years after. You should still listen to the judges, even if they, like Joshua, he added, right? How can he obligate people 300 years after to keep to his word? That's not adding to the Torah.
because God gave his approval. God never gave his approval to the rabbis of the Talmud. God has never come and said, revealed himself to the Jewish people, said, thou must listen to the rabbis of the Talmud. That's not something God never obligated us to listen to them. Again, not to mention the rabbis of the Talmud were nowhere near on the level of Joshua. Joshua was beyond a judge. He was an actual prophet. He was communicating directly with God. He was the understudy of Moses, who Moses appointed to be the leader of the Jewish people. And by the way, Joshua himself says in the first chapter, one of the first few verses says, be very careful to follow the Torah that Moses commanded us, right? And so Joshua's entire purpose was to just follow the Torah of Moses. He wasn't there to add. This was a mistake, and you're making a good point. It's a weird historical situation, but it seems that God acknowledged that mistake as being a mistake, yet if the Israelites gave their word, then that just stands, and God, like if they gave their word back then that even follows forever because they gave their word to the Gibeonites, even though it was on the premise of a lie and they shouldn't have even done it. But again, it's not a valid comparison because we're talking about Joshua, who was a real prophet, and we're talking about God explicitly approving Joshua's action and promise throughout history versus where do we see God telling us that the rabbis of the Talmud should be listened to? That's their own claim. Their claim. That's why it would be called self-referencing because they say you should listen to us because we said so, right? And how do you know God said to listen to them? You know, He said to listen to the judges of the high court. He said to listen, to have judges and law enforcement who are enforcing the laws of the Torah. But that's the whole point is they need to be enforcing the laws of the Torah, not enforcing the laws of the rabbis. That's not their job.
Right. So I don't see Joshua as a prophet giving him any points in this whatever
Because
happened, right? God
God,
does not. What?
because God confirmed, like he had open prophecy where God told him, I'm confirming your promise. You have to follow through with this promise. So you needed prophecy there in order to know that God actually agreed with this.
Right, but he obligated all the Jews back then to not kill the Gibeonites or not harm them, right? The Torah doesn't say don't kill the Gibeonites.
Mhm.
The opposite. The Torah even says go kill them because they are locals.
Mhm.
And it goes against the Torah. It's adding to the Torah. It's taking away from the Torah and still got to prove it. Why? The one reason. That's the way we see it. I'm not expect. continue to accept it. But that's the way we see it, is that when God says you need to listen to the judges, even if they do a mistake, right? Even if you claim that they did a mistake, you should still follow them if their intention was correct, right? Because God knows humans can do mistakes. That's one of the reasons why we believe you also follow the majority. There's less chance for the majority to make a mistake than individuals, right? So you see an example, and I don't see him as a prophet as an advantage. I mean, it doesn't take away, it doesn't add, because God did not say go to prophets, it says go to judges. Yes, some judges were prophets, like Joshua. After that, there was no prophets anymore, there were still judges. So you need to listen. There's another example, also from Joshua, but when they conquered Jericho, Joshua decided to anyone who takes anything from when they conquered anything from there,
He
you'll be
killed a man.
punished. You're not allowed to. What?
He killed a man and his whole family.
Yeah, correct. Because he didn't listen to that rule that he told him that you can't take anything, but you're going to burn it all. This is he added to the Torah. How can you kill someone? You see, God gives human the power to do such things. Now, yes, of course, like you said, no one can come and say, "Oh, go worship idols." That's against the Torah explicitly, right? But still, if it doesn't go explicitly against the Torah, like to worship idols, then you should listen to the court.
Well, look, I don't think Joshua was functioning as a judge. I think he was functioning as a prophet. I think that's clear. It even says God tells Moshe, I'm going to appoint another prophet. Moshe tells the people, God is going to appoint another prophet after me. So Joshua is functioning as a prophet and a leader, much like Moses did, not only as a judge per se. And by the way, as far as killing the man and his whole family, in that case, does God explicitly approve of that? I mean, I think the story goes maybe like the plague, there was a plague and the plague stopped or something.
Yeah, yeah. So basically, they win the war and they started losing. So Joshua prayed to God and told him, "Why is it happening?" He told him, "Because one of the guys didn't listen to your rules, so go and kill the guy." So God approved it. Yeah.
And what happened after he killed him? Then they won?
Uh, I believe so. I don't remember exactly, so I can't tell you, but I believe
I don't
it.
remember exactly, but look, to be honest, I would agree that that's not justice. Like for Korach, in that case, God decided to kill Korach and Datan and Abiram and all of their children and their wives, right? Like that was God's decision. So only God could make that choice because it's not a matter of the Torah never says you're allowed to kill innocent children, right? That's why you need God to tell you, oh, you must kill these nations because we wouldn't be able to do that on the basis of the Torah. The Torah says do not murder, right? So when God himself is the one doing that, that's different. But when Joshua is doing it, I would argue that may be an overreach of power. So I'm not here to just say everything Joshua did was right. Again, as far as the story of the Gibeonites that you mentioned, in that scenario, prophecy was very important because there God told Joshua, you made a mistake, but you're still going to have to follow up with your end of the deal. So God was the one who told them to do this. Only God could come and say to like, I know I said this, but in this scenario, you should do something else, right? You do need prophecy for that. Specifically when it comes to changing the law, you need prophecy. But when we don't have prophecy, when we don't have a man of God who's God is explicitly telling us to listen to him, even though he made a mistake, you can't just go ahead and apply that to everyone. I mean, I don't think you understand how dangerous that is to say that just because someone is in the position of a judge, you should now listen to them, even if what they're saying is obviously wrong. Like no, that's not true. And by the way, the majority is not more likely to be right. That's completely wrong. Look at the story of Noah. The entire world was evil, deserving of death, except for one man. Okay, you're telling me the majority is usually right? That's never even the truth. The majority is usually wrong. Out of the entire Jewish people who did not believe that they were going to go into the land, only two men, Yoshua and Caleb, Joshua and Caleb, got to go into the land out of the entire generation. So it's not true that the majority is usually right. The majority actually, unfortunately, is usually wrong. So that's why we need to be extremely on guard about majorities just going ahead and doing whatever they want when again they have no approval of God to do this. God has never given human beings the approval to just go and make up laws and say that they're working with the authority of divine judges. I don't believe that at all.
Yeah. So God gave the authority to the judges, right, to rule. I agree with you that the majority, you don't go based on majority of people in the world, 9 billion people, whatever it is. You go majority of the court. The court are qualified people, are very knowledgeable, right? Whoever gets into court, he's knowledgeable in the Torah and whatever he needs to know. And majority of these qualified people, you go by majority. You don't go majority of the if you go to majority in Judaism, right? Majority are not religious. You go majority of qualified people, right? It doesn't mean to listen to majority. Like I believe that verse clearly states, it doesn't say go. It says when it says not evil,
What
whatever.
what what is considered a qualified person? Why are they qualified? Because they have the title rabbi, because they lived 2,000 years ago. What I'm arguing that they're not qualified. I'm arguing that their judgments are not valid. I'm arguing that they don't have any real authority that they're working with other than their own word, right? You're just taking them at their word at the end of the day. And that's an extreme level of trust to have in someone, especially when they're telling you to do things that God never told you to do. So why are they qualified?
Yeah, so we had the court Sanhedrin, which is the court that goes back to Moses from generation to generation. It goes back to Moses. It ended a little bit before the Second Temple destruction. The Sanhedrin, the high court that was in the temple, and they were the people qualified, and they decided all laws. When there were any questions, they used to go to them. They used to decide. We call them Sanhedrin. You can call them whatever you want. We used to call them Sanhedrin. We have our history books that speak about them. I don't know if there's any external historical books. I didn't look into this, if there's any proof to them, but we know there was a high court in the temple
So
until they got destroyed.
where are they? They
Right.
don't. The
Right. So
Talmud,
we have our own.
the Talmud is
Uh,
the Talmud is not the court. The Talmud is
correct.
the high court. It's just individual rabbis' opinions.
I agree. So that Sanhedrin, I will call them Sanhedrin, they said because if you read the whole story, I won't go. It's very long, but basically they were expelled. They came back. They decided that whenever there is a disagreement, we go on majority. That's what the High Court said. From now on, any argument, you go based on majority. From now on, so even after there's no Sanhedrin, every time you can see the Talmud, there's a lot of different debates and the disagreements. But if we follow the Sanhedrin, the High Court, which told us from now on, anytime you have a disagreement, you go based on majority, and that's what we really do. That's what the halacha today. It goes based on majority. Then that's what we're doing. So we believe that's why we are following the High Court.
You're not following the high court. You're following the low court, based off of majority rulings of this specific institution. But ultimately, when you look at this institution, I'm not seeing any binding authority. They're talking amongst themselves to themselves. Like you're only bound by that ruling if you even believe in the authority that they possess, right? Like ultimately, if according to you, and it's a very reductive view of the world, if we were to unite a bigger authority of Jews than the past, and then we can change the law, right? So this is just ridiculous. Like, it's not about just putting together a majority of rabbis who believe something, it's about following the laws of God. Even if you put together 500 rabbis or whatever, 5 million rabbis, and they decided to make up laws that God never said, that doesn't make you obligated. At that point, they're just exposing themselves as being a a dishonest court because they're changing the law. They're not abiding by the laws of God. I mean, one of the examples is the second day holiday thing, right? Where the whole second day holiday started based off of a rabbinic decree that you need witnesses from the court in Jerusalem to proclaim the new month. Now, the Torah never says that. The Torah never says that you need the court in Jerusalem to proclaim the new month. The Torah just says go by the months, go by the luminaries in the sky. The moon is everywhere in the world. If you live in Babylon, you see the moon, you know when the new month is, right? Yet they had to wait for messengers from Israel. So they had a doubt on the day. So they added an extra day. And nowadays they admit that they don't even have a doubt, but they won't get rid of their extra day because the Rebbe's were so great and there were more of a majority 2,000 years ago. But again, like this is not real reasoning. The Torah literally says all of the holidays are one day, literally. You know, Sukkot, the first day is holy, the eighth day is holy. Passover, the first day, the seventh day. Yom HaZikaron, what you call Rosh Hashanah, even though it's not the New Year, it's the day of remembrance, and the seventh month, one day. The Day of Atonement, 1 day. Shavuot, the harvest celebration, 1 day, right? And yet the Orthodox Jews do everything 2 days, based off of a false premise, based off of a rabbinical decree that's nowhere to be found in the Torah. And because of this quote unquote majority thing, we now have an observance, or not we, but Orthodox Jews now have an observance that does not look like the law in the Torah, all because you followed a false majority when the Torah literally says, do not follow the majority to pervert the law. Do not follow the majority to do the wrong thing. So my argument here is, even if you could prove that it was a majority, which I don't necessarily believe it was, but let's just say it was a majority, it's still a majority for the wrong thing because it's not true. It's not right. So I don't care if there's a majority. The Torah tells us not to follow a majority for evil.
Yeah, so there's two things. First of all, for example, if we live in Jerusalem and we see the moon, and in China, whenever the moon gets there, it's cloudy. They don't see the moon. It's not like today we have smartphones, we can know what's going on, right? So how would they know what day to call the new day of the month? They can call a different day because they can't see. It's cloudy for a few days. And once they see it, they call it the month.
Cloudy in Jerusalem.
Exactly. Exactly. The same point.
We're talking about a time period where people knew how to calculate the months. They were counting. They were obviously counting the time. Even if they couldn't see the moon, they would know that the moon is back because the moon is on an exact cycle of 30 days anyway. So even if you
No,
couldn't
it's still
see it,
29 and a half.
okay, but I'm just saying, even if you couldn't see it, they would know realistically when it was. But the point is, even if you can tell me that it's hard to see the moon sometimes and it's a day off or half a day off, nowhere in the Torah does it tell you that you need to have witnesses of a moon to be proclaimed a new month by the court of Jerusalem. It doesn't say that. So that is all a fabrication, a creation of the rabbinic court. And then they took that law to then extend it to the diaspora, to the Jews in exile, saying that we want to maintain political power in Israel, so you have to wait for our proclamation of the new month all the way in Babylonia. And of course, they need hard to get from Israel to Babylonia back then, so they had like fires on mountaintops and messengers and all this, even though they knew the date in Babylon. And the Torah never says to get message from Israel. The Torah says to follow based off of the day, the date, and so you just calculate that from where you live. So
Yeah.
I don't buy it at all.
Yeah, so there's two issues. One, as the cloud, like I said, another one is the month is it's 29 and a half days, right? There's a certain hour, an exact hour, right? That the month starts to be the moon starts 29 days after it starts, 29 and a half days. There's no 29, there's no 30. So the way we do it is we do either 29 or 30. There's a leap month and there's a short month, right? Now, let's say in Jerusalem they decided this month is going to be the 29th. They can't know far away that they decided to be on 29th. They might decide it's going to be the 30th. They might decide 29. You're going to end up happening all over the world. In China, they celebrate this holiday on that day, or there's the next day, because they both had different Rosh Chodesh, different first day of the month. So you have to have everyone celebrate the holidays on the same day. Plus, you had the thing that the Torah says that to observe the spring, right? The Passover in spring. I don't know how you interpret it, but so we believe that the High Court, like until now, you were always saying the High Court, they only have the authority, but it seems here you're taking away the authority from them. But basically, they have the authority to declare when we add a month in order for Passover to fall in the spring and not fall like, let's say, the Muslims, right? They have their months always in the winter. Summer always rolls around because it's not the same like the sun year. So these are the issues. That's why they put it in place, a thing that in Jerusalem, the High Court, they decide when the new month starts, and everyone else has to follow. People are too far. They know for sure it's either the past month was either 29 or 30 day. That's the only two options. So they celebrate both, not to by mistake violate these days.
Okay, so a few things. The leap year is not a matter of authority. It's a quality of the lunar calendar, right? And so other cultures that have lunar calendars also will do leap years at times in order to have this line up, because apparently it's just a quality of the lunar calendar that it lags behind the solar calendar. And then it ends up not being aligned with the seasons and everything goes out of whack. So that's not something that you need to be proclaimed through authority. That's just a practical necessity in order to keep the calendar aligned. And again, that's something that could be implemented all over the world. It doesn't have to be coming from the high court in Jerusalem. Now, again, this idea that everyone needs to be celebrating on the exact, like, first of all, you're bringing up a very interesting point. And I'm not, again, I'm not a calendar expert nor a moon expert. But if you're saying that this is true about the moon, that there's a half day that's unclear, um, okay. But the point is that you just have to deal with that, right? Like if that's the truth, then you just have to deal with that wherever you are in the world. And so if in Babylon they were a day off from Israel, but they were still following the months correctly, and they were still actually like if that's their calculation, that's the best they got. Nowhere in the Torah does it say it needs to be like a a uh, a universal calculation for everyone. You have to just work with what you have. Now, again, if everyone was in Israel and we all had a if we had to go up to the temple, for the pilgrimage festival, yeah, there we would probably need a united date, and that would probably be easier because we were all in the same land. But the point is that you're not obligated to do this. You're not obligated to wait for the message from Israel in order to make sure it's the exact same day. You're not obligated to do that. Technically, what you have to do, if you just look at the Torah says celebrate this holiday in the seventh month on the first day of the month. So what you have to do, your obligation is calculate the months and celebrate it on that date. And just because your calculation is not identical to the one in Israel, it doesn't make it wrong. Okay. Additionally, and this is, might as well just talk about what's happening right now. Right now, there isn't a doubt. Right now, there is a universal calendar that we all follow. Yet they still won't get rid of this because of this majority nonsense, which you speak of, that just because it was a great majority of rabbis 2,000 years ago who made this, by the way, what I believe was a false institution, but even if you believe that it was a correct institution, nowadays it doesn't even apply, yet they won't get rid of it because they're bound to this system that's, again, not the Torah system. The Torah says, follow God's law. And we know what God wants with the holidays. He wants us to do one day. If we know the day right now, we have no excuse to do 2 days. Again, I don't even believe we had an excuse back then, but now we definitely don't have an excuse to do 2 days, yet we still do 2 days because of this idea. You have to follow the majority. You can't change what the rabbi said. Well, look, we know what the date is, and the majority is not here to stop us from doing the right thing, because then the majority is working against God and against the truth, and God actually explicitly says, do not follow the majority to do the wrong thing.
Yeah, so we believe is that God said to follow the high court, whatever they said. The high court are the ones that made this rule of sending people to
I
a
just have to
far.
stop you there. I just have to stop you there.
Yeah.
The Torah doesn't say do whatever the high court says, right? Like again, that's another the high court. When you told me, oh, what happened? You don't believe the high court has authority? I believe the high court has authority to create clarity on doubt of God's law, not to just make up new laws and new requirements. That's not that's not a part of the authority. But again, answer my question: why you'd still do it today? That makes no sense at
Okay.
all.
Okay, no problem. So why we do this today is because also, so I'll start with that again. So the high court are the ones that instituted that law that we have to do it that we have to send people to all over to do it the same day. Now that's why they have to do it 2 days. Now after that, we don't have the high court nowadays. In order to take away this rule, we need the high court to take it away. Just like we see with Joshua, that he made a rule, a promise that was illogical. Wasn't He should have taken it away after he did it, after he figured out that they lied to him. They still have to keep it years after, even though it wasn't a correct law. And you see that God did enforce it. Why? Because God said you should listen to your court, whatever they tell you. Now, yes, there's rules that high court can take away the previous court, but it has to be also a high court. Today we don't have that, right? That's why we're still keeping that, even though today we know exact day, right? We don't have to do both, but we have to do both because God told us to listen to the high court. And in order to take away what the high court did, it has to be, even though it sounds illogical, just like the Joshua story sounds illogical, but still we see God did approve that for generations after. And I believe that Joshua had nothing to do with the prophecy, that he was a prophet had nothing to do with that law, right? We just got to know through David and Joshua that they were prophets. They got God's message, that he approved it, but God says go to the judges, don't go to the prophets.
Yeah, but
Prophets, the only, yeah, I
you
will
didn't
just
even
finish in a
have
second.
to. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, prophets, the only role of a prophet is to tell the Jews, we see in the Tanakh, what to do, to go to war and not to go to war. If God, they were also like telling the Israelites to get back to God. They were telling God, telling you he's not happy, get back. This was the role. Their role was not to decide law. Right. A lot of them were judges, so they were able to decide law, but their law did not come from a divine source.
Yeah, but the problem here is that you wouldn't even have to nullify the previous law. It doesn't apply. The whole purpose of the law that was made then is not applicable to nowadays. So even by your own logic, where you don't want to mess with the previous court, which again, I believe was not a just court and was not acting in line with the Torah. But if you believe that it was, um, but you're not negating their ruling by keeping one day nowadays because their ruling back then just doesn't apply to the modern day when we have an instituted calendar where everyone knows the date. So you don't have to nullify their decree. They would agree with you. If you were able to have the knowledge of the dates perfectly and there was one date for the whole Jewish people, go ahead. That doesn't require you getting rid of their institution. You don't have to nullify what they did. We live in a different time where it doesn't apply.
Right. So we see that story with Joshua as the same way.
No,
Why
it's
would
the
it apply
same
years
thing.
after?
Not the same thing. Joshua made
What?
a promise to these people, we will not destroy you, period. So they
Well,
that
why would his promise make me obligated to follow his promise hundreds of years after?
again, if we see that God approved of Joshua's promise, which is what we see unfolding in this narrative, is that we have clear documentation that God approved of Joshua's promise, then that promise goes to this group of people named the Gibeonites, and those people were still existing at the time of David. So the same thing would be applied to them. It's still applied. Right now, it doesn't apply. The second day holiday thing doesn't apply because you know the date.
Right, but over there also was a mistake. The whole promise was on a false
I'm not
premise.
saying it was a mistake. I'm saying let's just say that they needed to make that institution of 2-day holiday in Babylon 2000 years ago. You don't need to do that anymore. So it's not like you have to nullify what they said. You just don't have to. What they were concerned
Right, you
with
don't
concern you right now.
right today we don't have the reason that they had back then to have it. But that's the way we see it is that we still follow unless you have a high court to nullify something that the high court did. Now, for example, today, if you have a rabbi that makes a rule today, a different rabbi, not too far away, right, can come and nullify it, right? If the group of rabbis, because it's not nullifying the Supreme Court, it's not nullifying the High Court.
But again, my point is you don't have to nullify anything. It simply doesn't apply. It was like if the rabbis of this 2000 years ago said, you know, you cannot ride a a unicorn, right? And like there's no unicorns. So it just doesn't apply. Like there is no problem with the calendar, there is no doubt of the date. So whatever they were discussing back then simply doesn't apply. Yet the Orthodox Jews would still carry on a decree that actually does not make any sense and is not applicable to the modern day, just because of this reverence for a court that, again, I already pointed out was following a law that's not even in the Torah.
Right.
So
So I discussed and I, what?
yeah, no, I just think so that just proves, first of all, that you shouldn't give so much faith to this court. And second of all, you shouldn't continue to perpetuate those laws if they're not applicable.
Yeah. So we believe that the High Court has this authority to institute that. So that's where it boils down to. And we believe that you can nullify it, even if it doesn't make sense, just like the story with Joshua, that 100 years after the whole rule didn't make sense, but still you see that God approved it, right? You still see that God approved it. Now we don't have prophets to let us know, but we follow our tradition that shows us, we have an example from Joshua, and that's our tradition that goes by that you can nullify, even though it doesn't make sense anymore, you cannot do it unless you have a high court to do it. That's part of the thing. And
Again, so you did not at all explain how it's nullifying. The word nullify is not appropriate in this case. You're not nullifying their decree. Their decree simply is not applicable. their decree was due to a concern of the date, and we no longer have a concern as to what the date is. So it's just simply not applicable. So that's why
Right.
it makes no sense for Orthodox Jews to be doing 2-day holiday, even
Right.
from
Just like why would it be applicable to the people in the time of David that did cause the killing of Gibeonites? Why would it be applicable to them? A promise that Joshua did hundreds of years ago, which
Because
was
the
even not a
Gibeonites
good
were the
thing.
same people. They were the same Gibeonites. It was the same situation. They were dealing with the same exact people. The Israelites made a promise to the Gibeonites, and that
It
was
wasn't the Israelites.
well,
It was Joshua.
Joshua was representing the Israelites. And he sat, it was like he was like the king of the Israelites, and he sat down with the group of Gibeonites, and he made a deal with them. So Joshua, representing the Israelites, made a deal with the Gibeonites, and that was still the contention in the time of David, the Israelites versus the Gibeonites. So it's the same situation. And again, your comparison is still not accurate, because there we explicitly see that God approved of this. Where do we see that God approves of the rabbis of the Talmud? God never told us that.
Not the Talmud. I didn't say the Talmud. I'm talking about the High Court, which was way before.
Where do we see that God approved of the law of the high court, or the law of this that you're mentioning here? And by the way,
Right.
this
So
is
we,
not exactly the high court, but I mean, you're saying like the Sanhedrin were determining the month. Where do we see that God approves of that? You know, God does not tell us that He approves of all of the malpractice of the rabbis, or of this tradition that the rabbis are claiming to be a part of, which, by the way, this is another important thing, is that talking about some legitimacy to then justify everything, right? Because like the way that that rabbinic Judaism works is like we roll out the carpet and it just keeps going, right? Until infinity, because there's literally thousands and thousands of books and rabbis talking back to each other, which in Orthodoxy we have to value all of them, right? Like one of the statements in the Mishnah or the Talmud, Elu va'elu divrei Elohim chaim, right? Both this rabbi and this rabbi are speaking the words of the living God, right? And so it's like this whole thing is insane. Like people arguing against each other are actually the word of the living God, and we have to respect all of these opinions, and everything's true, and it ultimately comes to justify way more than this. But I think this is a good example of just literally changing God's holidays. God explicitly tells you to do one day, and somehow we find ourselves uh, with the Orthodox Jews doing 2 days up until today, where it's not even applicable by their own logic. And again, you wouldn't have to nullify the previous decree. You would just have to acknowledge that it's no longer relevant, um, which is just a simple logical truth. It's not like you need to undermine their authority in order to admit that you don't have a doubt of the date today, whereas they did.
yeah. So talking about you mentioned the Elu va'elu divrei Elohim chaim. The meaning over there is that, I'll give just an example. If now a governor of a state takes a group of people that build streets, right, the construction workers, tell them build a street over here, and you decide what's going to be the speed limit. I'll give you a few options, either 35 an hour, 45, or 55. When you're done, you decide. Okay, they go, they finish building it. One guy said, I think it should be 35. The other guy said, why 35? Where I live, it's the exact same street. Over there, it's 45. So let's do it 45. The other guy said, well, where you live is a residential area. Here it's in the middle of the forest. It should be 55. There's no like kids here. They all debate, and then they all come together. Let's say it's 55. We all agree it's going to be 55. All of the options were valid. The 35 was valid because that was one of the options that the governor gave. Yes, they all decided at the end to go with the 55, so that's what we have to follow. They put the 55 sign, but all the options were valid. That's means God gave us the Torah. Now we go with the Torah, try to read it. One has this understanding, this rabbi has the other understanding, this one has the other conclusion. All the conclusions are valid, but we have to follow one conclusion. We can't have 35, 45, and 55. It has to be one. So we go by the majority and we decide it's the law. That's the meaning of El Velo Consent.
Well, I mean, I think that you could have two opinions that may be valid, yet it's very extravagant and arrogant to say that your words are the words of the living God, because they're really just your words. Not to mention, you don't need every street to be the same speed limit. Some streets are 55, some are 65, and some are 45. So, I think we have to go case by case, and we have to talk about different issues. But this attempt to swallow the pill of the entire oral Torah, or the entire rabbinical corpus it's way beyond one issue. It's believing that in this entirety of all of their writings, you're now bound to all of their decisions or to all of their rulings, which is it's just extremely ridiculous to assume that you'd be obligated to follow this system, which clearly just consists of opinions of people. And the fact that they got together and calculated which one was the majority opinion still doesn't make it the ultimate truth. In fact, again, the ultimate truth is the Torah itself, and these courts are held accountable to the Torah. And so if we can demonstrate that their laws are not written in the Torah, then what is their authority? They're not Joshua. They're not the high court. They're simply just your local rabbi with his opinion. That doesn't.
Right. And God said you should go to the judge in your time. Specifically says in your time. Each generation should have a judge. You should go to him. We can't go today to Joshua or to the high court that was 2,000 years ago. We need to go, if we have a question, to judges, which are rabbis today, right? And yeah, so I just want to tell you, we're like 2 hours around talking. Time flies when you enjoy, but yeah, I need to get going. But I still want to talk about a few more things. So maybe we'll just close this part. I'll have a few different verses I want to go over with you, and then we'll end it.
Yeah, go ahead. My only response to that is that you are choosing to crown these rabbis as your authority, right? You're choosing to give them that title of judge, to assume that they're judging truthfully and correctly, and that would be something you need to follow. At the same time, I have every right to say, no, I don't accept their authority. I don't accept their judgments. I can prove that what they're saying is not in the Torah, and what exactly makes me bound to what they're saying. I mean, that's the whole point here, is that like it comes down to a question of choice as to like which authority do you want to obey. And when I look at the totality of rabbinic Judaism, I'm seeing a religion that is very far away from what the Torah itself obligates you. If you were to follow just the laws in the Torah itself, your life would look very different than if you were following all of the laws of the rabbinic tradition. So that's why I think you are allowed to question them, and you're allowed to come to different conclusions than they came to. And by the way, we're allowed to set up judges and courts right now in our time, and we're allowed to dispute the past judgments that have been made, and that's a right that even you admit is given to us as well. So I suppose that's what I'm doing.
Right. So basically, the way I see it is, you have your own interpretation, and we have an interpretation that goes generation to generation till Moses. It goes through the high court, through prophets. It goes. We have a chain of narration that goes from the Supreme Court down to the Tanaim, to the Amoraim, which was the Gemara guys, and we can see who was a student of who. He was a student of his, of his, of his. He got his tradition and understanding from his rabbi. And his rabbi, we have a list of rabbis that go from the Talmud till the Tanaim, and before that till Ezra, till the. So we have a chain, but you, correct me
Ezra,
if I'm wrong, you don't have a chain
that's just
for your
completely incorrect.
understanding.
It's from Moses to Ezra is a very good chain, and then after Ezra, you just start seeing the disintegration of the Jewish people. And by the way, the Tzedukim to the Karaim is a perfectly equal chain. I mean, they weren't as many of them, but from the time where there was the rabbis popped up, the Tzedukim were there. And at the time of the rabbis, when they were in exile, the Karaim were there. So there's always been a tradition of Jews who have rejected the rabbinic interpretation of the Torah. But for people to claim that Ezra and Moses are in line with the rabbis is just incorrect. Moses writes these words of the Torah, says, do not add or subtract these commandments. And then Ezra teaches the Jewish people by getting up on a platform and just reading the Torah of Moses. Just reads the Torah of Moses. That's how he taught the Jewish people. So, I just completely reject the idea that historically the Jewish people have always understood the Torah to be the oral Torah. The oral Torah is not mentioned once in the entire Tanakh. That's a much more valid point that needs to be made. The whole history of the Tanakh is always is follow the Torah of Moses. And like again, this line, oh, it's all the way to Moses. No, there's no evidence of that. There's no evidence of that whatsoever.
Yeah, so by the way, with Ezra over there, it says that he read it and he interpreted it and explained it to them, the
It doesn't say
meaning
that
of
he
each thing.
interpreted it. It says that he explained it to the extent that it
Yeah,
needed explanation. But the point is, he just read it, right? He just read it and they heard it and they understood it. And then he explained it to them. They had priests there teaching the people in case they missed something. Like, obviously, we know that things need to be explained. Yet the idea that there was this, again, all of these secondary traditions and interpretations that somehow are also considered to be from Moses, there is no evidence of that. It's just a claim.
right. And another thing that the Karaites don't link to the Tzedukim. How do you call them in English?
Odysseys.
Yeah, they don't link. It's a different group. They have also differences between them with different. Some believe in this, some of that. They don't
It's
totally align. It's
the
not.
same fundamental belief that the Torah is what we're obligated to follow, and the tradition of the rabbis is not the Torah. Like that's the same fundamental belief.
Yeah. Okay. So let's get to the other thing. I watched some of your videos.
Mhm.
Uh, Not all, some, whatever. And I saw some stuff you were saying, which I think differently. So I would like to bring it up and see,
Go ahead.
yeah, if I can. So, for example, you said that there's nowhere in the Torah that says that wasting seed is a sin, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, and then you were saying about the story with the two sons of Judah, right, Yehuda, that you saying the issue there was that he didn't want to continue the seed of his brother, and not the fact that he was wasting the seed, right? But I don't see it that way because we do see in the Torah that if someone doesn't want to continue his brother, that he just do chalitza. There's a process called chalitza. You don't kill someone for that. It's a mitzvah to do. It's a command to do. If you don't want to, there's an option. Just like if you don't want to stay with her, you divorce her. There's an option to do chalitza. God would not kill for such a thing, right? It's an optional. What is a sin is the wasting seed.
Yeah. I mean, you're talking about a situation pre-Torah. There was no law of chalitza at that point. As far as the law, as far as Judah was concerned, this is what his son needed to do. And, God saw Onan to be evil for not continuing the name of his brother. Like the point is you have to take the story in its full context. I'm even willing to admit that like, there may be something wrong with deliberately not impregnating a woman, uh, who, like, you're with a woman, you can have children with her, and you're like, no, I'm not going to do it, right? Like, that could be an aspect of the problem, but the point is, you have to take the whole story into account. The whole story is there was a man who was obligated to impregnate his brother's wife, and there was no such thing as chalitza. Like there was no implication that he had an alternative, right? Otherwise, Judah would have given him an alternative, right? Or God would have given an alternative. In that story, there was no alternative. He needed to do this, and he was obligated to impregnate his brother's wife, and he deliberately chose not to. And so that is the case. And so to then apply it to like a young man who's just jerking off, again, I'm no fan of masturbation, but it's definitely not uh, a wicked sin that's punishable by death. I mean, that's ridiculous. I mean, this was a specific story. It's also a story of like Judah and his son. Even let's just say we had a land, right? And a man was supposed to marry his dead brother's wife, and he decided not to, and he didn't do chalitza. We still wouldn't kill him, right? Like the point is, this is not a man-made death penalty. It's God is killing him because God deems him to be unrighteous. So the point is, though, you have to take the full the full scope of the story. Um, you know,
Right.
and again, the story is not necessarily applicable to anyone else. It's the story of Onan, right? The story of Onan at a time before the Torah, where somehow Judah knew this law that a brother needs to carry on the name of his brother through his wife, and then Onan deliberately chose not to do that, and God killed him, right? You can't then take that case and extend it to other people. in any respect, by the way. Like again, like I told you, if someone chose not to do chalitza and not to do yibum, he didn't want to marry and he didn't do the whole spitting with the shoe and he didn't do anything. He was just like, screw it, I don't care. We're not going to kill him for that, even though God killed Onan, right? So the point is, it's a story about Onan. It's a story with many details, and you can't take out one detail and then claim that that's the sin. I think it was a multifaceted sin.
Right. So what I would say to that is that for example, you see that there was always a sin in the Torah to worship other gods,
Mhm.
right? It was before the Torah was given, it was after. This, I don't see how you make a distinction between before and after. If something is wrong, it's wrong,
Chalitza,
right?
my distinction is the chalitza part. The idea of chalitza was only introduced much later on to the Jewish people, like in Devarim. So the idea, like you were saying, why didn't he just do chalitza or something? Like that was not an option. Like he needed to marry his brother's wife. That was just clear. That was what he needed to do. He was obligated to do that, and he didn't do it. And he was obligated to impregnate her, and he deliberately chose not to. That's the story. So to then just take out one detail and apply it to uh, you know uh, a man who's spilling seed. I mean, like that's just ridiculous. It's just not. It's
Right. So
not fair.
I'm not saying he should have done chalitza back then. I mean, we don't know. Maybe they knew of that thing, maybe not. It wasn't told in the Torah back then. But the option, right? You don't see something so severe being killed for becoming optional later on. I don't see how it's logical something to be so sinful to become optional, just like worshiping other God doesn't become optional, right? After the Torah is given. What I do see here is wasting seed, which for that I believe he was put to death because if the putting to death was the reason of not continuing his brother's name, then why would it be optional after that? Why would someone not put to death after that? Just like on Shabbat and worshiping other gods, after that people are being put to death. That's the way I see it.
Yeah, but again, we don't.
That's what makes me to think that the issue was the birthing seed.
But again, there's nothing here that you can actually apply to anyone else, right? You wouldn't say that we should give the death penalty to someone for wasting seed, right? You wouldn't say that. That's not a law in the Torah, right? You wouldn't say
Right.
that.
So the issue, right. So the issue here, in order to kill someone, to put him to death, I don't know if you what you believe about that. We need to have
I'm sorry. I'm just gonna
uh
say one more thing. Nothing that he
yeah.
did is deserving of the death penalty as far as we are concerned. Yet, based off of this story, God killed him, right? So it's not like there's something in this story that like, oh yeah, that's he spilled seed, so he's deserving of the death penalty. Oh, he didn't make his brother's name continue, so he deserves the death penalty. No, this is what happened, and God killed him. It's not something that you can now go ahead and take out details from that story and apply it to other people.
Right. So we believe is that in the Torah, every story that's put in the Torah, it's for a reason, for us to learn something from it. Like all these forefathers, right? Abraham, Isaac, all of them, they lived for a long time. I'm sure if you would write the like a biography or whatever it's called about them, it would be huge. But the Torah gives you specific details, specific small stories from their life to teach you something about it, right? It shows these stories, not other stories of their life, to teach you something. So the way I see it is that if it would be really sinful, yes, it is like a mitzvah to do yibum to continue your brother's name, but it's not something to put to death for.
And spilling
So
seed is
if he was put to
not to
death,
death for
what?
either. Spilling seed is not something to put to death for either. Nothing in this
But if
story
you see,
made him deserving of the death penalty other than the fact that God killed him. So my only point is that I'm not, of course, you should learn a lesson from this story, but we have to take the full story. The story wasn't a man spilled his seed and was put to death. See, that's not the story. The story is a man was supposed to marry his brother's wife. And instead of impregnating her, he spilled his seed onto the floor. So God killed him. So that's the story. So learn what you will from the story, but don't pretend like the only thing that he did wrong was spill his seed. There was a totality of this narrative. And in the same way that he was not deserving of death for not committing yibum, for not impregnating his brother's wife, he's also not deserving of death for spilling seed. Neither of those things are deserving of the death penalty in the Torah, right? But God judged Onan in a certain way in this scenario, and you have to just refer to the scenario in its completion. And again, you could potentially take out of this scenario a lesson that destroying your seed on the floor when you're in front of a woman who you should be impregnating is not a good thing to do. I'm perfectly willing to make that case. Don't forget, though, what the rabbis say is this is the worst sin in the Torah. It's deserving of death, and they go in the Zohar and all this stuff. No, that's not true. It's not even a sin. It's not even nowhere in the Torah does it say, "Thou shalt not spill your seed." Nowhere in the Torah says you're deserving of death if you spill your seed. That's my only point. I agree. Much better to if you're with a woman, you better have sex with her, and you better not destroy on the floor. You should have children, be fruitful and multiply. I mean, that's what God wants for men and women. I'm not saying that spilling your seed is great, but also the problem with demonizing spilling the seed is that what happens if you're with your wife and you just want to have oral sex one day? Like men have a infinite amount of semen that comes back, like this is not like some crazy waste. Men will emit semen in their sleep, in their dreams, by the way, what if your wife is post-menopause? Are you spilling your seed now? Like it's all nonsense. The point is when you're with a woman, you should have sex with her. And if she's a righteous woman that you can have children with, you should impregnate her. And you could learn that lesson from this story. But the point is just take the narrative in its completion. This was the story. It happened with Yehuda's son. He was supposed to impregnate his brother's wife. He chose not to, and God killed him. That doesn't mean that we can now start killing people for not marrying their brother's wife or for spilling their seed, but we can take lessons from this. But please don't tell me that this is the worst sin in the Torah when it's literally not even a prohibition.
Right. So I didn't say it's the worst,
But
but
that's
I'm
what they
saying
say.
it's a sin.
That's what they say.
What?
That's what it says in the Zohar. That's what it says in the Shulchan Aruch. So like
Okay. I'm not sure if it says in Shulchan Aruch that's the worst. I could
also
check
the
it. The Zohar, I believe it says, but not in the Shulchan Aruch.
I'm
It
almost
is. It
positive.
does. Yeah. That's the
Like,
worst sin.
yeah, like quotes the Zohar. Almost positive it's in there.
I hear it could be. Okay, it could be. Yeah, but what I'm saying is that it is a sin, and because me, that's my logic. I guess we'll let the audience decide. But my logic is because you do see that the other sin is optional. Basically, the not continuing your wife's name is an optional thing to do. Then what leads me to think is that the other part of the story, wasting the seed, is the part that he was put to death for. Because
Look,
if he
that's
was put to death
not,
for something that it's optional after, to me, does it make sense? Okay, if you believe so, listen, I can't change
not
your
optional.
mind.
But I'm just saying it's not optional. You do have to marry your brother's wife. And there's only one way out, and it's through some ritual called chalitza, which didn't even exist. So it's not optional. You have to marry your brother's wife. This guy would needed to marry his brother's wife and continue his brother's name, and he chose not to, and he destroyed his seed onto the ground, and that was evil in the eyes of God. But again, from here you cannot extrapolate that it's forbidden to spill your seed because the Torah doesn't say that. The Torah never says it is forbidden for you to spill your seed. You could take a lesson that when you're in front of a woman who you should be impregnating, don't just spill your seed onto the floor. But like again, that doesn't mean that every time you sleep with your wife, you must come inside of her vagina. Otherwise, like you're an evil sinner. Like that's just
Yeah, but
not, it's not real.
how could you say that there wasn't an option back in Yehuda's sons? How can you say that Chalitza wasn't an option? You can't
There
know.
was no
The
such
Torah
thing
doesn't
as
say. Maybe
chalitza.
it was, maybe it wasn't.
There was no such thing
What?
as chalitza. They didn't have chalitza. If they had
How do
chalitza,
you
they
know?
could have done because that's what
No,
he should
but the
have done.
issue, right,
He
that's
should
what I'm
have done
saying.
that.
That's why the issue was this wasting seed because he wanted to lay with her, but not to have kids. So he did want to lay, unless he would do chalitza if he didn't want to.
He didn't
But he
want to
did
have
want to lay
kids,
with her.
meaning he didn't want to continue his brother's name, which was the whole point of him marrying her to begin with. The point of him marrying her wasn't just so they could have sex. The point of him marrying her was so that he could continue his brother's name. And he chose to not do the thing that he was obligated to do, you know?
Right, and he didn't do chalitza because he didn't want to sleep with her, but he didn't want to impregnate her to continue his
Say that.
brother's name.
I
That's
personally
why.
don't believe that like Chalitza, they knew about Chalitza the same way Yaakov like didn't know he's not allowed to marry two sisters. But
Right.
but the point is whether or not he knew about this ritual of Chalitza, the point is, as you said, he chose to marry his brother's wife. He chose to marry her. He's like, I'm always sure I'll marry her. Right. And then in the privacy of their own intimacy, he was like, oh, you know what? I'm not gonna do what I need to do. And so that was evil in the eyes of God. But again, we cannot take a lesson from here to start creating a law, to start saying that like anyone who spills their seed is deserving of death, or anyone who doesn't do yibum is deserving of death. We just can take lessons from the story, and I'm not disagreeing with you. one of the lessons you could take from this story is that not impregnating a woman when you should do that is wrong. And that's a fair lesson to take from it. But again, it doesn't mean that every time you have an ejaculation that's not inside of a woman for the purpose of procreation, that's a sin. That's a huge leap. It's a huge leap.
I hear you. Okay, so I want to go to the eye for an eye thing. So you believe eye for eye is literal, means you need to take someone's eyes out if he or broke a hand or whatever?
Yeah, of course. I
Okay,
mean,
so I want to ask what?
seems simple to me.
Okay, so I want to ask you if you want to open it up, you can open it up. Exodus 21, verse where okay, verse 22.
Okay.
Okay, actually no, that's an after that. Let's see where is that? Maybe it's before. Let me see. Oh, okay, sorry, it's before. It's 21. It's 21:18.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it says two people fighting, and one hit the other with a stone or just with his fist, and the guy would not die, just would get injured. So then it continues. The next verse says, if he recovers and able to walk, then he would just pay him for the damage he did, right? That's what it says. So why is the law of eye for eye, tooth for tooth is not applied here? Why does he just have to pay him?
Mm-hmm. Okay. I mean, but does this prove that an eye for an eye doesn't exist? Because like literally the next case does say an
Right,
eye for
right. So if you right, so first, how do you explain this verse?
why is this different? So I have a few things I could say. I think the main point here is the beginning of the statement. When two men fight, right? As in they're two men who have decided to fight with each other. So it's not someone who's assaulting another man, right? And then in the next case where there is an eye for an eye is when two men were fighting and then they hit a pregnant woman, right? So they hit another person who was not part of their fight. And the eye for an eye is for the woman that they hit, not for each other. Because if two men decide to start throwing hands against each other, that's not exactly like it's not like I went and knocked someone's eye out because I'm a malicious, terrible person. It's because we were having a fight, and that's the fight, right? So you could say that it's just because it's two men engaged in a fight. That's not the same as assaulting an innocent person, which is the next case where an eye for an eye is applied when two men were fighting and they assaulted an innocent woman who was passing by. Now, additionally,
Wait, but just to stop you about this one, about the woman, right? So over here it says if there was no, if the baby didn't die, right?
fetuses
Then
fell out, there was no fatality, there was no harm to the
so
woman.
what should be done? It says
Well, there you give money with the
right.
fetus,
So it's also money. Only
with
if he dies, then you kill.
the fetuses, right? So let's read it. Let's
Correct.
read it, right? It says if they hit the woman and her fetuses fell out, but there was no harm to the woman, then the man, her husband, gets to with judges give a price or some way to compensate them. But if there was harm, then you shall give a soul for a soul, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a foot for a foot, right? So, by the way, this is proof that the Torah doesn't consider a fetus a life or a full-grown life. Now, I'm not pro-abortion at all. I think it's insane that women are just killing their fetuses. But nonetheless, for transparency's sake, the Torah's saying that if they knock a woman and her fetuses fall out, but there's no harm, as in there's no harm to the woman, then there's a monetary payment. But if they actually do strike the woman and kill her or knock her eye out or knock her arm off or break her arm, then they actually do get a soul for a soul, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. So it all comes down to, are you harming an innocent person? And is that innocent person a fully developed life, or is it just a fetus? Because if it's two men fighting, another man knocks the other guy unconscious into bed rest, well, then he has to pay for his rest time, right? But or if it's two men fighting and they knock out a woman's fetuses, well, they just have to pay money because it's a fetus. It's not a fully grown human, fully formed human. But if they knock the woman, then you get an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a hand for a hand. So it's explicitly breaking down the different punishments based off of the severity of what you're doing.
Yeah, but you need to make a separation here between the story with the woman and then going to eye, because the story with the woman is a monetary punishment. It's
Oh, no,
not
no,
the eye
no.
for eye.
Excuse me, please. That's incorrect
Yeah.
reading. Um, the money payment is for the fetuses, right? So we'll read it again.
Correct.
This is Exodus 21, verse 22. If two men shall fight, and they strike a pregnant woman, and her fetuses come out, but there is no harm, then they shall surely be punished as the husband of the woman approximates and uh, estimates for them, and they shall give with judges. Okay, so that's the first case. Where you give money is when the fetuses fell out, but there was no harm. However, and this is the point, but if, verse 23, but if there is harm, if there's an actual fatality or real harm that occurs to the woman, then you shall give a soul for a soul, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a hand for a hand, a foot for a foot. Right? So it's differentiating between fetuses versus a fully formed female. When it's the fetuses, correct, you do give a monetary payment. But when there's actual harm that happened to the woman, then the law is an eye for an eye, a soul for a soul.
Yeah, but this eye for an eye, soul for soul comes after the verse that says if there's if the kid dies, then it's a soul for soul, right?
No, not if the kid
I
dies.
guess what's it?
Her fetuses fell out, but there was no harm. There was no harm. The point is there was no harm. When there's no harm, then you give money. But if there is harm, then you do an eye for an eye. So
No,
it's
but it talks about
inherently
death here. It talks about death. This verse it says soul for soul. It is not just breaking someone's
no,
arm.
no. It's a son means like a tragic harm, like a real harm. It doesn't mean death, right?
But
If
it says
you
nefesh
are,
tachat nefesh. Nefesh
and
tachat nefesh is death.
yeah, continue the question, continue the sentence, right? Or you give a soul for a soul, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a foot for a foot, right? So the point is that if there is actual tragic harm that occurs to the woman, then you actually do give a soul for a soul, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, depending on what happened. If she died, then they get put to death. If her eye got knocked out, then they get their eye knocked out. But the point is that it's differentiating. When there's no actual harm that happens, then you give money. But when there is harm, money is not going to work. Money is not an eye for an eye. Money is not a soul for a soul.
Right. So okay. So how would you explain if you go to the book of Numbers, 35, verse uh, verse 31? If you open up and then I'll say what I want to say.
Yes.
Yeah, so it says you should not take money for someone that kills someone. He should be put to death. You should not take money compensation. Why would the Torah have to say that? If it's obvious, why would it even think if someone breaks your tooth, you break his tooth back? So if you kill someone, of course you're gonna have to kill someone. Why does the Torah have to come and say no? It shouldn't be money over here because you killed. It should be death. Death
Why
too.
does the Torah have to tell you not to take a bribe? Of course, you shouldn't take a bribe. I mean, it's telling you must be just. Don't take a money payment for someone's
No,
life.
I'm
It's
saying
not.
because previously, according to you, previously the Torah said eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, right? That came before Numbers and Exodus,
Look at the next verse on 33, right? It says, "Do not let the land become full of flattery." What is flattery, right? Chanifa.
right?
It's like you
Right.
can flatter people by using means of persuasion. If you try to give money or you try to give some compensation, be like, "Oh no, don't kill me. I'm like an important guy. Here's like $1 million. Here's a position in the company." The Torah is warning against corruption in judgment, where people would be likely to take some sort of compensation, some sort of, I mean, the Torah does this very often. It warns against corruption. You'd be like, why does the Torah have to warn against corruption if corruption's wrong? Well, because people are liable to do corrupted things. So the Torah has to warn, do not take a covering, do not take a cover payment of any sort for a murderer who deserves to die. He must be put to death. And don't
Right.
let
No. So my question was, it's not why the Torah says it just randomly, right? If the Torah never spoke about this issue and says that, makes sense. But the Torah already previously spoke about this issue. If you harm someone, then you pay. Then you do eye for eye, tooth for tooth, right? You don't do money,
yes,
right? You
that
do
is the law.
physical.
That is the law.
Correct. I mean, I don't believe so, but that's what, if you believe so, then after that, the Torah over here, you see, comes and says, if you kill someone, don't pay him. What does that have to do? Why would I even pay him? If I knock someone's tooth off, out, then the other guy's tooth should be, where's the money coming in here? Why would you have to say it? Like, you understand what I'm trying to say here?
Yeah. I do, but I think that it's warning against corruption. I think that's what the purpose of this verse is. It's warning against corruption and flattery that's liable to happen when people use money to get away from actually receiving penalties, which, by the way, is what's going on with this uh, compassionate view of the rabbis that an eye for an eye is not literal. It's just another way of saying, oh, money talks, like just pay up, buddy boy, and you'll be fine. No, that's not the law. The law is you must receive the penalty that God created. And by the way, sometimes you could take a cover payment when your ox gores, right? The Torah says when your ox who was warned against gores, really you should be put to death, but you could give a kofar, you could give some sort of cover payment for your soul to redeem your soul. But here is saying that for a murderer, you cannot. And so the point is that people might think that they can get away with things, but they cannot get away with it. And I think that that's explicitly clear when the following verse says, "Do not let the land become full of flattery." Because what does flattery mean? Flattery means when you use methods to make people work in your favor, to try to, oh yeah, I'll flatter you, I'll give you some money, I'll give you some bribe so that I don't have to get the death penalty. No, God is telling you, one of those things that even says, I don't know if it's right here, but it says, Me'im mizbechi tikachenu lamut. Even if he's at my altar, right? He's at the altar, you should still take him to put him to death. Like there's nothing that can get a murderer out of his penalty. So I just think it's a warning against corruption.
Right here, okay, yeah, valid, but still, I think my point is also valid to say that all the other places speaks about any injury speaks about money. That's why here comes to say no, but when it comes to killing someone, no money can be justified. Plus, for example, if someone takes someone's eye out, the other guy's the guy that did it also gets his eye out. Did you gain anything? Yes, you got revenge, which by the way, the Torah speaks
Justice.
about against revenge. You didn't
No,
get
the
anything. But if
Torah
he
speaks
pays you
against
for your
revenge. The Torah speaks against revenge, but it doesn't speak against justice. What do you gain from someone being put to death? What do I gain?
okay, so I'll tell you what you gain is
No, no,
that
by the way, it
someone
doesn't
that killed,
matter. It
yeah,
doesn't matter. I mean, again, that what a like that's just a such a self-indulgent question. Like it's not about what do you gain, it's about what is justice, right? The point is that justice must be served, and this is the justice that God says. Now, again, your point is like, oh, it says don't take a cover payment for a murderer, but you could take a cover payment for an eye for someone who knocked out someone's eye. Like that's you trying to play games with the law. Like the law is the law. Like you must take an eye for an eye. Now we have a judge who's getting bribed through money. Like again, you just got to follow the law. Like you can go, oh, it was never explicitly prohibited that you're not allowed to take kofar for a eye, right? Only for a murderer, but for an eye for an eye, you could take a money payment. That's just another way of saying, yeah, you don't have to follow the law, just because it wasn't explicitly told you, do not follow the law. Like, I just think you have to follow the law, and I think it makes perfect sense. And by the way, if you didn't want your eye knocked out, then don't knock someone else's eye out. I think that's perfectly reasonable. We're talking about, or like, just picture this, like a vicious, evil man wakes up in the morning and goes over to someone, takes a knife and stabs them in the eye. Like, oh no, don't worry, just pay me money. Money? The hell is money? Like that's a ridiculous idea. I mean, it's just a worship of money, as if money can somehow compensate for the loss of a limb or a vital organ. It's insane. Like the
okay.
Torah's law is very clear. Well, why would we have to change it? I mean, not that
So
there's
you
any.
saying, so you saying if they both fight and one took the other one's eye out, if they were both fighting, then it's money?
See, so that's a good question, which is like in that case when they were both fighting, there was no defined injury, right? It was just like the guy fell into bed. So like what happened to him? Nothing really. He just fell into bed. So all you have to do is pay for his lost time. But like if if you did knock out an eye, like that would be a question for the courts. Whereas like what is the line between a malicious guy versus a guy who's like just engaged almost in self-defense, right? Like so who attacked who? Was it like take a modern example of like a fight where two men agree to get into a ring and fight? Like that's or let's say one guy wins the fight, right? Now does he get the penalty? Like, I mean, there's a degree of agreement when two men agree to get into a fight versus one man gets attacked. But in this case, regardless, there is no defined injury, right? all that happened was he fell into bed. So it's like, also one more thing to point out is that it's possible that it's only an aspect of the case, as in we're being told multiple aspects of the law, which is if you knock someone into bed, you have to pay for his lost time. And also, you might also have to get your eye knocked out, right? It doesn't mean like there isn't other penalties based off of the situation, but it's just an additional thing. Like you have to pay for his lost time. But if you knocked his eye out, you would probably also have to get your eye knocked out, again, considering that you were the aggressor, et cetera. So I'm just saying
Right. So
it doesn't say that you don't get an eye for an eye in that case. It's just telling you that there's an additional point that you need to pay for someone's lost time, rest
right.
time.
Also, so it could, the eye for eye, tooth for tooth continues in verse 25, and it says also a wound for a wound and a chabura tachat chabura. Chabura, it's also like a type of wound,
Yeah,
right?
wound,
So
yeah.
in this case, that he felt, it says over here when the two guys were fighting, it says that he got injured. It doesn't specify what injury, right?
Does
And
it
then
say
if he
he
was
got
able to
injured, or
withstand,
it just says he
what?
fell into bed? It doesn't really specify
Right,
if
and he didn't die. What does it mean, fell to bed? It means he got injured. He got sick, something.
knock someone out, just knock him unconscious, right? That's not a defined injury. Like it's not a specific, there's no wound in per se. If you just knock someone out cold, right? And then they get up like a day later or 2 days later, then there's like, again, I suppose we could knock you out too, but that's not exactly a defined injury, right? So I think the law is telling you like when you did a specific thing, that's when we repay you with that specific thing. But you could just read that case as being a case where nothing particular happened other than him falling into bed, in which case all you have to pay for is his rest time. Now, again, if there was a chabura, if there was a wound, then very possibly you would get a chabura and you'd have to, like I'm saying, like there are two independent laws that exist in the Torah. So you would have to apply them accordingly, that dependent on the situation. One law doesn't mean the other law doesn't exist. I mean, the other law clearly exists. It's said twice, very, very openly.
Yeah, yeah, I hear what you're saying. Another thing is about the malkot, right?
Mhm.
The whipping, how do you call it?
Lashes, yeah. Whip,
Lashes, yeah, lashes. So basically, if I believe that's what you believe is that it should be 40, not more, not less.
yeah, as it says in the
Okay. Okay, so the verse basically says it should be 40, not more. It does not say not less. Just like it says about the Torah, don't add and take away. It does not say here. Here it only says don't add. Plus, the verse before, it says that you should lash him according to his evil. Means the verse here says you should
yeah, but
lash him according to his evil,
okay.
but don't go above 40. So it
Then
could be
that's the
anything
law.
up to 40.
That's the law. Yeah,
Exactly. So that's what
you
the rabbi
couldn't.
said. Rabbi said it can't be over, the Torah says it can't be over 40. The rabbi decided we're going to do up to 39.
But that's ridiculous.
And
That's retarded. Like the
why
Torah,
is it ridiculous?
because the Torah says 40. So 40 is the limit, not 39.
Correct. But the Torah allowed you to do less, correct?
Yes, but you can't say that when it says 40, you must do 39. You
No, no,
actually,
no, it did not say that. You could do less even. And it says in the Gemara
where
that
does
if
the
the
number
guy,
39 come from?
what?
Why can't you do 40? Could you do 40 according to the rabbis?
I in general can't do nothing because I'm not the court, right? But
No.
the court
But
decided we won't do
according,
more than 39.
okay. But
But that's
according
totally
to the
fits within
rabbis,
the law.
according to the rabbis, can the court give 40 lashes?
According to not the rabbi, according to the court cannot, correct?
Yeah, okay. According to the rabbis, which they claim that the court cannot give 40 lashes, even though the Torah says you can give up to 40 lashes. So they're contradicting the Torah.
No, because the Torah did not say you should give 40. The Torah said you should not exceed 40.
They said that you cannot give 40. The Torah says you
Correct.
could give 40. That's a contradiction.
Correct. Up to 40, right?
That's a contradiction. They say you cannot give 40. The Torah says you could give 40. That's a contradiction.
No, but here the court says to the court decided, the Torah gave you an option to the court, right? Because they are the ones that give you the lashes. The Torah says you should do any number up to 40.
This
The
just
court
sounds like
decided we
a
should follow the
pathetic,
39
sounds like
max.
a pathetic attempt to grab power, to be like, the right way is one less than what God says. It's like, what kind of nonsense is this? Let's just stick with the Torah. You can give someone lashes up to 40. As you explained, the verse is clear, up to 40, but you should evaluate it according to his wickedness. but 40 is the limit. So let's just use the Torah's number instead of pretending like 40 means 39 because we said so.
That's basically me seeing it as the court. They have the authority to lash, and they decided we won't
They
go
decided that
over
you cannot
39,
give.
which is allowed by the Torah to do less than
Torah
40.
allows 42, right?
Correct. And they decided not to do that.
Torah allows 40.
Why can't they decide to do less if the Torah gives
Why?
you the option to decide to do less?
Because they're incorporating into law. They say you cannot give more than 39. So they're lying. They're saying that, like, again, if they just said 39 is a good number. Again, that would seem a little odd to me. It's like one less than 40. It's a little weird. Let's just say that's what they said. They're like, according to our court experience, 39 lashes is a good number. Okay, but that's not what they say. They say you cannot exceed 39. That's the law in the Talmud, right? You cannot exceed 39 versus the Torah says you cannot exceed 40. So it's just a different law. It contradicts. Torah says 40.
Right. So that goes back to the point we were speaking before about with Joshua, that that's a proof that humans are allowed to put guards and to decide stuff for humans, even for further generations. Just like a king is allowed to the king. You got authority from the Torah to appoint a king. The king, we all know what king does, right? King puts laws.
I mean, a king, by the way,
King
no,
puts
a king
segregations.
is not supposed to do whatever he wants. God warns against a king taking too many women, too much gold, too much wealth, being too raised up above everyone else. God warns against a king not being righteous. And in fact, when the Jewish people wanted a king, God actually said, "Why do you want a king?" And Samuel told them he's just going to rob you and take all your money and your children. And so, it's not like the king just has unlimited power to do whatever he wants. The judges don't have unlimited power to do whatever they want. Why in the world are we listening to people who make it their goal to literally just deviate from the Torah wherever they can? The Torah says 40, 39, right? It's like a joke. The Torah says 40,
Okay.
let's just stick with that.
Okay, so first of all, the judges have more power according to the Torah than the king. The judges have authority to kill, not the king. Yes, I agree the king might have authority, but the Torah does not say that the king can kill, but it does say it about the judges. Therefore, they have more power than that.
But where do they get their power to kill? As in, like, can they just kill people because someone wore like the wrong color hat? Or can they kill people for breaking the laws of the Torah that make you deserving of death? Right? As in, that's my whole point is the job of the judge is not to just do whatever they want. The job of the judge is to implement the laws of the Torah. The Torah is the law book that describes what is deserving of the death penalty. That's what the judges are there to implement. They're not there to implement their own ideas. Otherwise, they're just not acting in line with the Torah. They're just following their own law. They're like, it's like, what's the difference between that and American law? American law is like 18 years old is the age of consent. If you have sex with a 17-year-old girl, you're a criminal. Like that's arbitrary. That's a man-made line in the sand. It's the same thing. You're just creating a line in the sand that's not from the Torah. So it's just like a different religion or like a different law. It's not God's law.
Right, but if the king is sanctioned by God, right? Like we see the kings, God appointed them. He said, if I choose a king for you, then you're allowed to have a king. And what you were saying before that God didn't like that they were asking for a king, that was because it was for the wrong reasons. That's why God got angry about them. They were looking for a king because not for the right reasons. And second of all, if a king has the authority, and we see from God, the authority is from God. I'm not talking about today America and the people that don't follow God, right? I'm talking about the king that follows God, has the authority to make rules. The rules are not in the Torah. Still, you have the Torah obligates you to follow these rules, even though it's not Torah rules, right? A king can make any rule, even regards to Torah. For example, when you make courts about
The Torah
civil
doesn't say
issues,
you have to follow the king, whatever he says. The Torah doesn't say that.
right? The Torah says you can appoint a king. We all know what a king does, right? The Torah knows that people know what a
You're
king is.
obligated to follow whatever the king says. I mean, the king of Israel said you should go worship the golden calf. Should they listen to him?
No, if it goes against the Torah, no. But I'm talking about rules that don't go against Torah. He could still put fences and rules if they don't go against the Torah. For example, he could say, for example, if there's a dispute between two people, he can even say to pay more taxes and other stuff. He could obligate you to pay more miser, right? More tithe, however you call it. he can obligate the king to give more tithe, even though the Torah does not say.
Why?
Why he's allowed to do that?
Yeah.
Because the king has authority to make rules. If that's he decides the rule to tell you to do more, to pay more monetary, then of course he has
Who gave
authority.
him that authority?
Who gave authority to Joshua to make this peace, the wrong peace, and continue to for the generation? We see by God that kings have authority, even though Joshua wasn't a king, he was a judge, and he got that authority.
Referencing one example where Joshua openly made a mistake, and the only reason why it was maintained is because he gave him Israel gave the Gibeonites their word, and God ultimately approved of that. Okay, that doesn't
But
mean that now every king and leader has infinite power to do whatever they want, to make up laws, to make up tithes. What are you talking about? God is the one who gives tithes. He tells us how much to tithe, who to give tithes to. Every year there's different tithes. All of that's outlined in the Torah. A king who has the audacity to get up and start making up laws is not a righteous king. He's actually just a dictator.
again, but you're not answering about Joshua. He made a rule. Why would I be obligated by Joshua's rule? Yes, it's okay if Joshua made a peace. It wasn't the Israelites, it was Joshua, which was the leader. Now, again, I could say the judges are the leaders, they make the rules for us. Now, am I obligated to follow the judge's rule, me as individual, you as individual? In this case, they were obligated to, even hundreds of years after. Even though they didn't do this, it was Joshua, it wasn't them.
Only
Why would
because
Joshua represent me? Why would he decide for me? I'm doing the Torah. The Torah doesn't say not to kill Gibeonites. The opposite. It says you should kill them. If you made a mistake, Joshua, you don't kill them. Why am I obligated to not kill them? And I get punished for it?
is because God approved it. If God didn't approve it, then you're right. That's all I can say.
So that's my point. I see that God did approve this absurd
You don't see that
scenario. God approved
because
it.
God approved the story of Joshua doesn't mean he now approves every leader for all of time to make things up because Joshua made a mistake once that God just told Joshua you should honor that word. That was
It,
God's,
should,
but that doesn't mean
it
now
shows you an example.
shows an example, except in that example, we had a man who was very close to God and who God himself approved of this and said, okay, you should follow this. You don't have God approving all the rest of the decrees of the rabbis for all of time. That's not something God has done. So that doesn't give them the authority of God.
No, that shows you that the judges have this authority. And it's not only that. So in Jericho, that he decided to burn the whole city and not let anyone take him. You see that God approved that as well. It's another scenario. It shows that the judges have this authority, right? Joshua, it's not because he was a prophet had that authority, because the Torah doesn't give the prophets this power. He gives the judges the power. If you have any dispute or any issue, it shows you that they give the lashes. It's not the ruler, it's the judges give the lashes. It's the judges execute people. They have the authority. Now, yes, today we don't have these, according to us, according to the Torah, if I read it literally, why not today? Today we should also have this power if we have our own country, right? Yeah, because we live under America or whatever, we can't do it. But we should also have that authority. The rabbis came and said, no, it's only in the temple when you have the high court, the Sanhedrin, right? But really, if you read it word to word, you would be allowed to do that even today. So that's the way we see it. I hear you don't agree, which everyone has their own opinion, but
Kings
that's
and
the way we see
judges,
it.
kings and judges are obligated to follow the Torah. Their only job is to lead the people in accordance with the laws of God. Their job is not to make things up. Their job is not to make up their own laws and to institute their own opinions. Their job is to enforce the laws of the Torah. That's why God tells the judges to be men of truth, who hate greed, and he tells the king to be familiar with the Torah and to be humble and to not be too materialistic and arrogant because leadership is all about uh, bowing before God and instituting his will amongst the people. And when you see leaders that are constantly interested in furthering their own opinions and their own laws that differ from the Torah or are nowhere to be found in the Torah, that is proof that that's coming from a corrupt source, not from a pure source, not from people that are actually dedicated and interested in upholding the Torah. And that's why I think all Jews should familiarize themselves with the five books of Moses. Just read the Torah, see what the laws are, and follow that to the best of your ability. And God willing, that'll give us the opportunity to gather together and maybe become a united people and actually rebuild.
Right. But if you follow that way, then you everyone would have their own, like the Karaites, the Samaritans, they all have their own
I think the Torah
understanding.
is a much more uniting source than all of the endless books of the rabbis. If the Jews were united around the Torah itself, we would have a much more clear and common foundation that we can all work with. That actually comes from God Himself. That actually in the Torah, when you read the Torah, it says, "Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe Lemor," God spoke to Moses. These are the words that God spoke to Moses. This is not just some rabbis debating in a court in Babylon. No, this is the word of God. That is a way better foundation, and I
Well,
think that's what we need to follow.
yeah, I have a question. What would you do if the eighth day, right, you have a child, the eighth day falls on Shabbat? Do you circumcise or not?
Yeah, the same God that says, well, first of all, yeah, it's not a direct like breaking Shabbat to circumcise necessarily. So that's first of all. And second of all, yeah, the same God that says to keep Shabbat says to circumcise on the eighth day. God actually, has instituted sacrifices in the temple on Shabbat, even though like I don't think we could be like slaughtering animals and roasting them on Shabbat. But it, God, it's like the same God who said, "Do not murder," told Abraham to slaughter his son, so like God is the one who decides.
Yeah, we would agree. The Orthodox also believe we should be done because, for example, the Karaites, I don't know about today, but back in the day, they used to believe that you're not allowed to do it in Shabbat.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's why
Um,
I definitely don't align myself with every Karaite opinion. I just align myself with the Karaite view that the Torah is from God, and if they have all of their own Talmud and their own interpretations, well, then we'd have to debate that as well. Um, but yeah, also not to mention like the act of cutting off the skin, it's not like that's not inherently work necessarily, so like it's not an explicit breaking of Shabbat anyway.
right here. Uh, okay, one more last thing, and then we'll close it up. You were saying about Niddah, if I remember you correctly. You were saying that there's no obligation in the Torah for a Niddah to immerse in the body of water after she's clean, right?
Yeah.
Right. So the rabbis say she should. The reason is, I want to hear what you have to say about that. The reason is because the Torah specifically says that if someone touches her while she's impure, then he has to go and immerse himself in the body of water. So if he has to, even though he just touched her, even more so, wouldn't it be that she has to, that she's the epitome of that?
Yeah. So a few things. First of all, it doesn't say that he has to immerse in a body of water. It says he has to wash with water. So it doesn't mean you have to go to a mikvah. A mikvah specifically refers to a pit of a gathering of water, which according to the rabbis, they have some insane requirements that it needs to come from rainwater through the roof with the pipe kissing the other pipe with the 40 sa'ah and all that, which zero mention of that in the Torah. The Torah does say that a pit of a gathering of water, be'er mikveh mayim, or bor mikveh mayim, a pit of a gathering of water is a pure source of water, so a swimming pool would suffice for that. Yet the Torah doesn't say virachatz, v'taval b'mikveh. It doesn't say you shall immerse in a pit of gathering water. It says virachatz b'mayim, wash with water. So taking a shower would suffice for purification from someone who touches a niddah. Yet the thing about niddah, and this is the thing, if you read the laws of purity and impurity in the Torah, it's always very clear what you have to do in order to purify yourself. It gives very clear qualifications for every different scenario. When it comes to the Niddah, the woman on her period, it says she's impure for 7 days, period, end of story, right? And so there is no purification process for her that she needs to go through. And this is interpretive, so I'm just speculating that it's because she herself is the source of the impurity, right? And so if she herself is the source of the impurity, after 7 days, she simply stops being impure. Versus you who touched her while she was impure, you are becoming impure from the source of the impurity. So you have to go wash yourself and wash your clothes. But the woman herself, what the Torah says is she's impure for 7 days, period. The Torah doesn't say that she must immerse or wash after those 7 days. For example, by a zav, which is a man who has a irregular flow out, he has to wash with living water, which would be like a river, like a live body of water. But it only says that by a zav. It doesn't say that by anyone else. And by a nida and a zava, it doesn't even say that they have to wash at all. And so, I don't really know the reason. I'm just telling you what it says, and I just gave you like a speculation of the reason, but it's ultimately just, my speculation. The truth is, I don't know the reason. I'm just telling you what the law is. The law is very clear how long people are impure for and what they have to do to become impure. And when it comes to a niddah and a zava, a zava being an irregular period, neither of them have the obligation to wash with water in order to become pure. Definitely nowhere in the Torah does it ever say v'taval b'mikveh, v'tahar, that in order to become pure, you have to immerse in a mikveh. That's just not a commandment in the Torah ever. So at the very most, a woman would have to just take a shower after her period. And by the way, just one final thing. The period is 7 days. What the rabbis have done is given every woman every month the law of a zava, which is a woman with an irregular period. And because of that, women are on their periods or in their state of separation for almost 2 weeks out of every month because they have to count 7 days from after they stop bleeding. Not to mention within those 2 weeks, within those 12 days, the rabbis say you cannot touch each other, you cannot sleep in bed together. And so we're looking at extreme separation of couples for almost 2 weeks out of every month, concluding with this great ritual of the mikveh, which again, none of this is sourced in the Torah.
Right. So one thing about the mikvah, yeah, it does not say, it says you should wash in water, but back then they didn't have showers, right? How they used to wash? They used to go to body of water and dip in.
No, they
So
would
what they did.
you take a bucket of water, you spill it on yourself. I don't know.
Okay, so again, it says tirchatz. We see it as tirchatz. Your whole body has to be wet. It's not just, oh, maybe I'll wash my head. Is that enough?
Take a shower. First of all,
If I,
only time it specifies you must wash all of your flesh is with a man who has a seminal emission. So if a man has an ejaculation, says you must wash all of his flesh with water. And the same goes for if he has sex with a woman and he ejaculates in her or on her, they must both wash all of their body with water. But again, when you take a shower, you are definitely washing all of your body with water. So there's complete fulfillment of that.
yeah, and another thing, it says that after she's stopped being niddah, at the eighth day she should bring offering to the priest.
Where does it say
Yeah,
that?
it says in Leviticus 15, I believe it's talking about her, 15 verse 29.
Leviticus 15. $39. This is a Zava.
29,
This is a Zava.
20.
Yeah,
Oh, you're
this is.
saying that's about the Saba?
Oh,
So you're making a
absolutely.
distinction between that.
Look at the beginning of the paragraph, verse 25. And a woman who shall have blood flow many days, not at the time of her separation. So it's outside of her regular cycle. Or if she continues to have flow after her cycle, right? So she's bleeding, she has her regular cycle for 5 days and then she just keeps bleeding, right? Past the 7 days. Then she's an irregular period. She has to wait till she stops bleeding. This is verse 28. When her flow is purified, then she should count 7 days, right? So after the flow stops, she should count 7 days, and then she will be pure. And on the eighth day, she brings an offering. So this is specifically a woman with an irregular period. Again, you can see even she doesn't have an obligation to wash for purity. And I mean, ultimately, what we're being told here is that she has to bring an offering, which obviously doesn't apply nowadays because we can't bring offerings.
Right. Okay, no problem. So yeah, I would love to talk more. There's a lot more to talk about, but yeah, it's getting late. I
Hey,
didn't think it would
yeah, I
take.
mean, it's nice to meet you. Are you Israeli by any chance?
Yeah, I was born and raised in Jerusalem. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I could tell that you had some more familiarity with Hebrew than most
Oh,
Americans. That's good.
yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate you having the conversation. It's always good to create dialogue. I think it's been very informative. And again, I pray God redeems us, gives us the clarity that we need, and that we really put in the work ourselves to receive His blessings. So,
Yeah. Amen. Amen.
all
So
right.
yeah, I enjoyed it. Let's put it this way. You are very smart. I would say, yeah. Like, let's put it this way. I thought it would be easier against you, but yeah, whatever. We're both trying to reach the truth. And I guess, yeah, whatever. Enjoy
Well,
talking to you. And
let's reach the truth. I pray that God helps us. So you should have a Lila Tov. Good night.
nada, então. Amém.
All
Ok,
right.
rapidinho, vamos lá.
All right. Bye.